The captain of the TV detective squad was sitting in the station, reading fortunes. He looked at me like I didn't even have enough money to buy a meal. He handed me the only 100 pesos he had on him, just to help me out. To show my gratitude, I offered to read his fortune in return. I never imagined I'd discover that the mole from that drug trafficking case, the one from 3 years ago, was actually one of his own men. But just as I prepared to tell him the truth, he cut me off abruptly. Whether it's true or not, you're in the wrong place. I could arrest you for obstructing justice. He thought I'd listen, but he didn't expect my next words to freeze him solid. I have a lead. When he heard that, Captain Xiaoji paused. He narrowed his eyes and asked, "What lead?" "I haven't finished the reading yet, so I don't know." Xiaoji laughed. "Joking with the police? Get out of here right now." However, as soon as he finished speaking, a black Audi screeched to a halt in front of the stairs. A woman stumbled out of the car and came running inside. "Officer, is there any news? My daughter, did they find my daughter?" She was frantic, barely able to breathe. Hearing her, Xiaoji's face softened instantly as he rushed to support her. "Mrs. Li, please stand up first. We're checking the surveillance cameras, and Team 2 is out on the streets searching for her. We'll notify you the second we have any news." But those words were hollow. They only served to agitate her husband, who stood right beside her. They knew the first 48 hours were crucial, and time was almost up without a single lead. Xiaoji fell into a heavy silence because it was true. They had nothing. It was as if the girl had been swallowed by the earth itself. The cameras only caught her getting into a van with fake plates before it hit a blind spot. As Xiaoji tried to explain, the woman became even more frantic, clutching his sleeve. "I beg you, please. Ming Ming is only 7 years old." Her heartbreaking cries echoed through the empty station entrance, leaving Xiaoji paralyzed. But then, I let my voice cut through the tension. "You want to find someone? Pick a card." Everyone froze in their tracks at my words. Xiaoji turned to me and roared in a fury. "Shut up. You think this is the time for games?" He didn't realize that the husband, Li Guiyang, was staring at my cardboard sign like it was a lifeline. When a person is desperate, they'll claw at anything, even a total stranger's promise. Li Guiyang shoved Xiaoji's hand aside and stumbled toward me. "Can you really tell me where my daughter is?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Mr. Li, he's a fraud," Xiaoji shouted, rushing to stop him. But Li Guiyang shoved him back with a sudden burst of strength. "Stay out of this. If you can't find her, you won't stop me from trying. Just tell me, how much do you want? Whatever it costs, I'll pay it." I looked at him with total calm and said, "I don't charge for this." I cut the deck quickly. "Use your left hand and pull a card." Xiaoji stood to the side, his hand hovering over the pistol at his waist, his face pale with rage. If this fraud dared to say the girl was dead or tried to extort them, he'd cuff me on the spot. Li Guiyang reached out with a trembling hand, hesitated over the deck, and pulled a card from the middle. He flipped it to reveal the 3 of swords, reversed, 3 blades piercing a red heart, but then the image began to distort before my eyes. The system text flashed across my retina, 3 of swords, reversed. "The pain is fading, a suppressed cry for help. This is not an omen of death." Analyzing environment, high humidity, clashing metal, volatile chemical odors. With everything clear in my mind, I prepared to reveal the information they craved most. "She's alive." The woman stopped crying instantly, stumbling toward me and falling to her knees. Li Guiyang felt his own legs give out, nearly collapsing right there. But Xiaoji just grit his teeth and glared at me, demanding, "Where is she?" I looked down at the card and spoke calmly. "North of the city, near the water. It's a cramped space. It's open to the air, and you can hear bells ringing." Xiaoji's brows shot up. "North? Near the water? Bells? It's the old muddy pier. It's abandoned, and there's a colonial-era bell tower there that rings on the hour." I kept going. "The person who took her, you know them. They smell strongly of paint. Not fresh paint, but a scent soaked into them for years. Think, who fits that?" The air in the room froze at my words. Li Guiyang's mouth hung open, his pupils trembling before he forced a name out. "The painter." His wife gasped and screamed. "It's that contractor. We fought with him over the final payment. He even threatened us. He was at the house just the day before yesterday to pick up tools." Xiaoji turned pale, whipped out his phone, and barked at his team to locate Lu Jiamin immediately. Still on the phone, Xiaoji sprinted toward the patrol car while the couple followed him like madmen. The sirens wailed to life, and the car roared through the gates, vanishing into the traffic. I didn't share their panic. I calmly slid the 3 of swords back into the deck. I shuffled the cards as a notification appeared. Effective divination uses, 1 of 3. 40 minutes later, 3 patrol cars screeched into the complex at full speed. Detectives jumped out, dragging a man in overalls stained with layers of multicolored paint. His hands were cuffed behind his back, and his head was forced down. The Li couple held a little girl wrapped in a blanket, sobbing with pure relief. They had found her exactly where I said, in the basement of that abandoned pier. Back at the Criminal Investigation Bureau, Xiaoji didn't go to the interrogation room. Instead, he strode straight toward me and said in a raspy voice, "We got him." "She was exactly where you said," he muttered. I looked up slightly and replied, "That's your merit. I'm just a fortune teller." Xiaoji crouched down to meet my eyes. "Cut the crap. Did you know it was a kidnapping? Hiding or obtaining info illegally is a crime." "I didn't hide anything," I said calmly. "I told you the moment you arrived." Xiaoji locked his gaze onto me, searching for a crack in my story. but my eyes were too still, like stagnant water. Even under a police captain's scrutiny, my heart rate didn't skip a beat. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. I let out a small chuckle and pointed at my stall. "I still haven't been paid for this reading." "Don't worry about that," he grunted. He looked at me with a mix of suspicion and exhaustion. Xiao Ji let out a laugh of pure disbelief, but just as he was about to speak, something caught his eye. A white van screeched to a halt nearby. A young woman in a white lab coat rushed out, clutching a yellow manila folder. It was Lin Wan, the director of the city's forensics department. "Captain, the DNA results for the dismembered body case are in," she called out. "There are no matches in the database, not a single one." Xiao Ji stood up, rubbing his forehead in frustration. "No matches again? We've filtered through every man in the missing persons database." He couldn't believe they were back at square one. Lin Wan handed him the folder. "The skeleton is robust with high bone density. It's definitely a man, but we've ruled out every missing person." Xiao Ji took the folder, his headache returning. This case had been stuck for 2 weeks. All they had was a torso. No head, no limbs, just a dead end. Sitting to the side, I fixed my gaze on that folder. Suddenly, my system panel lit up again, a red cursor locking onto the file. The second client had appeared, and it wasn't a man. Lin Wan stopped in her tracks and turned to look at me sitting on the ground. Xiao Ji frowned and barked. "How would you know anything about this?" I pointed at the folder in Lin Wan's hands and said, "That's a woman's corpse." Lin Wan froze for a second, a look of pure disbelief washing over her face. "Sir, the scientific identification of the third lumbar vertebra and the pelvic angle both confirm male characteristics." I listened to her and let a small, knowing smile play on my lips. What I said next left her completely stunned. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the space in front of me. "Draw a card, and I'll tell you why." Xiao Ji was about to explode, but Lin Wan stopped him and sat down, intrigued. "Fine," she said, staring at me. "I want to see if divination can beat anatomy." She reached out, pulled a card at random, and tossed it onto the table. The Empress, upright. But in my system vision, the scepter in the Empress's hand was shattered. A black shadow loomed over her abdomen, a variant of the upright Empress. It signaled a false appearance of fertility caused by prolonged androgen consumption. Exogenous hormones had triggered secondary skeletal development. I looked at the card, my voice cold and clear. She was an athlete, a shot putter. Lin Wan's expression shifted instantly as I added, "Long-term steroid use causes obvious bone masculinization." The data they gathered pointed toward a man. Lin Wan's mind raced, searching for a match for this extreme forensic anomaly. I lightly tapped the Empress card and said, "The Empress represents the mother. She had either just given birth or suffered a miscarriage right before she died." "Impossible," she exclaimed. "The uterus was missing. So how could you possibly know that?" "Check the pubic symphysis," I replied calmly. "Look at the dorsal surface. Old pits mean past births. Recent tears mean a miscarriage." Hearing these clinical terms from a fortune teller's mouth made her expression turn dead serious. She stood up immediately and snatched the case file. "Captain Zhao, I have to go back and re-examine the remains." Xiao Ji scoffed, pointing at me. "You actually believe this kid's nonsense?" "I skipped the pubic details because I assumed it was a male," Lin Wan snapped back. "If he's right and she's an athlete, our entire investigation just narrowed down significantly." Without another word, she sprinted back toward the building without looking back. Xiao Ji watched her go, then glared at me, hissing, "If you're wrong, don't think you're leaving tonight." I said nothing and simply picked up the Empress card as my system pinged. 2 out of 3 readings complete. I checked my phone, 20 minutes left, and I still needed one more client. I called out to Xiao Ji just as he was about to enter the building. "Captain Xiao, the final reading. It's for you," I said, fanning the cards across the table. "Let's solve what's haunting you." Xiao Ji froze in his tracks, his back tensing up instantly. "I have nothing to solve," he growled, but I kept shuffling the cards. "Everyone has something, especially cops." He ignored me and walked into the building, convinced he only needed hard evidence. I didn't push him. I just sat there in silence as the seconds ticked away. It was almost time. Suddenly, a third-story window at the station slammed open. Lin Wan leaned out and screamed down to the others, her voice trembling. "Captain Zhao, he was right. The pubic symphysis shows clear injury and steroid residue." Xiao Ji stopped dead at the entrance and looked up, his face pale. "It's a woman," Lin Wan shouted. "A shot putter went missing from the sports academy 3 months ago." Xiao Ji's hands began to shake as he reached for a pack of cigarettes. He couldn't even get his lighter to spark. A kidnapping and a dismemberment, and I had predicted them both from a sidewalk stall. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of dread and realization. He hurled his lighter against the pavement and marched back toward me. I checked my watch, only 5 minutes left on the clock. Xiao Ji took a deep breath and stood right in front of my table. Just then, a deafening screech of tires echoed from the intersection down the street. A silver sedan spiraled out of control and slammed into the guardrail at full speed. Boom. The prediction hit home. The ground shook as the car flipped on its side, sliding 10 meters into a stone pillar. The front of the sedan was pulverized, coughing out a thick cloud of white smoke. Xiao Ji reacted instantly, shouting as he sprinted toward the wreckage. The guard and a young officer named Seng followed, extinguisher in hand. I stayed on my stool, watching Seng's back as he ran. I remembered the reddish glow I saw on his face earlier, the omen of a bloody disaster. I stood up abruptly and screamed at the top of my lungs. Don't go to the left. The gas tank is on the left. It's going to blow. My voice was hoarse, swallowed up by the wind and the rising police sirens. Xiao Ji heard me, but he was already too far away. Sang heard nothing, driven by a desperate need to help as he ran straight for the driver's side. Captain Zhao roared, Sang, get back, but it was too late. Just as Sang reached for the mangled door, a jet of flame erupted from beneath the chassis. The shockwave hit, sending debris and fire spiraling into the air. Sang was thrown back 5 meters, slamming into the median with a sickening thud. He screamed in agony, clutching a left leg that was now gushing blood through his fingers. Xiao Ji dragged him away while the others fought the flames, his face covered in soot. He stood by the flower beds, gasping for air, and turned his head to look at me. I just sat back down on my stool, watching him with a cold, steady gaze. He stared at me as if I were some kind of incomprehensible being. Captain Xiao Ji's voice was trembling as he asked, How did you know? I told you to watch out for his left leg, I said, fanning out the cards. He has 1 minute left, Captain. Xiao Ji didn't hesitate anymore, collapsing to the ground without caring that his uniform was getting filthy. He reached out with a hand covered in soot and grease, pulled a card, and flipped it over. Justice, reversed. In the image, the scales in the goddess's hand were tilted and the sword pointed toward the ground. I looked at the card and my pupils dilated slightly. The system's interpretation was even more shocking than I had imagined. Justice reversed, perversion of the law, internal corruption. Key info, that gun is missing a bullet. I looked up at Captain Xiao Ji and said, Captain, that drug trafficking case from 3 years ago, your informant died. Xiao Ji's body tensed instantly like a bowstring about to snap. That was the deepest scar in his heart. You always thought the narcos were the ones who killed him, I whispered so only we could hear. But the cards say that's not how it happened. Xiao Ji stared at me, his eyes bloodshot, and hissed, What are you implying? I pointed to the building behind him, where most of the criminal investigation windows were dark. The person who leaked the information, the person who fired the shot, is in this building. I looked him dead in the eye and said, And they are very close to you. Their service pistol is still missing that 1 bullet. A chill ran from Xiao Ji's feet to his head as my words turned his blood to ice. Right then, a notification chimed in my mind. 3 out of 3 successful divinations. Mission accomplished. Calculating reward. I ignored the system's voice, took the reversed justice card, and tucked it back into the deck. I quickly folded the deck away. I shook out the tablecloth, folded the small table, and stuffed everything into my bag. My movements were fluid and natural as I said, My shift is over, Captain Xiao Ji. With that, I turned and walked away into the darkness of the night. Xiao Ji remained sitting on the ground, frozen in that same position for a long, long time. He only snapped out of it when the ash from his cigarette burned his fingers. He turned his head to look back at the police station, glowing brightly under the lights. A place that once felt safe and sacred now looked sinister in the dark, like the gaping maw of a giant. Xiao Ji felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Meanwhile, as I stepped further into the shadows, that feeling of having everything under control vanished. The adrenaline faded all at once. My head started to feel incredibly heavy. My lungs tightened until I couldn't breathe, and a violent cough shook my chest, bringing the sweet taste of iron to my throat. Host helped solve a major serial case and saved a police officer's life. Mission grade, perfect. Calculating rewards. Brain cancer cells reduced by 8%. Lifespan increased by 60 days. Additional reward, 2 million yuan in cash. I pulled out my phone, and the screen flickered to life. The bright light stung my eyes as a bank notification appeared. Current balance, 3 million yuan. 3 million. I stared at the number, but before I could even laugh, a sharp cramp doubled me over against a nearby wall. I coughed until I was spitting up nothing but bitter bile. I forced myself upright and wiped my mouth, but I didn't head for a hospital. Instead, I ducked through a few alleys and entered a crumbling apartment complex. My room was barely 10 square meters, furnished only with a rickety table and a cheap wardrobe. The next morning, I sat in a high-end consultation room at the City Cancer Hospital. The attending physician, Lu Guiyang, held a fresh MRI in one hand and my scan from last month in the other. His brow was deeply furrowed as he turned to the intern standing beside him. Is the 3.0 T machine broken? Did they forget to calibrate it? The intern stammered. Doctor, it was calibrated this morning and worked perfectly for Director Zhang. Lu Guiyang held the plates up against the light of the viewing box once more. I sat across from him, my clothes hanging loose on my thin frame, but that aura of misery was gone. I popped a cherry into my mouth and asked, So, Dr. Lu, how much time do I have left? This makes no sense, he muttered, pointing at a white shadow on the scan. How is the edge of this tumor starting to calcify? And beyond that, the overall size has actually shrunk. The change isn't massive, but it contradicts everything we know about pathology. Just 1 month ago, your glioblastoma was rooted deep in your brain. It was compressing your optic nerve and motor centers. I told you then you had 3 months at most. But now, the spreading has stopped dead in its tracks and is even showing signs of regression. He leaned in close and whispered, What did you eat this week? Some folk remedy or some black market miracle drug? I pulled out a handkerchief and wiped my hands clean. I told him there was no folk remedy. I was just in a good mood after sticking my nose in some business and making some cash. Dr. Liu was speechless, probably wondering if being in a good mood could actually cure cancer. If that were the case, why would anyone even need doctors? I asked him if it was just a misdiagnosis, but he ignored me and told the intern to call radiology for the raw data. 10 minutes later, the room was packed with the head of radiology, the deputy of neurosurgery, and 3 gossiping residents. Whispers and gasps filled the office as they stared at the screen, confirming the tumor had indeed shrunk. They debated if I'd had secret gamma knife surgery or if my body was undergoing some massive autoimmune storm. I thought back to the diagnosis that gave me 3 months to live and the intern who told me to go home and settle my affairs. Now that same intern was hiding in the corner, instinctively backing away from me as if I were a ghost. I sat on the sidelines, listening to them argue with medical jargon I didn't understand and didn't care about. The system's reward was real. The stabbing pain in my head had faded, and my hands had finally stopped shaking. I stood up, interrupting their little conference, and told Director Liu to just write the prescription. Liu Guiyang snapped out of it and stared at me for a long time before nodding. He started rambling about energy control systems and metabolic trends. He told me that if we managed this right, I might actually survive with the tumor for another year. Liu Guiyang began typing rapidly on his computer. He suggested staying with the same treatment plan as before. I looked him in the eye and said, "I want the best you have." I pulled out a black credit card, tossed it on the desk, and told him I didn't care about the cost, only the results. I told him I wanted the best painkillers and the most effective treatment available. Liu Guiyang's hand froze, remembering me as the kid who used to hesitate for minutes over a single test. The guy who used to settle for the cheapest generic meds because he had no choice. He warned me that the costs were astronomical, but I didn't blink. I told him I was heading to the counter to deposit $500,000 right now. I demanded a private room for my chemo, complete with an air purifier and a humidifier. The office fell into a heavy silence for a few seconds. The intern stared at the black card on the desk and swallowed hard. The young nurse who pitted me earlier suddenly stood up straight, holding her clipboard with newfound respect. Liu Guiyang didn't ask where the money came from. He just focused on saving my life. He put me on a regimen of monoclonal antibodies combined with electric field therapy. After getting my orders, I walked out and spotted a 5-star hotel right next to the hospital. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight in to get a real meal. Inside, 2 streamers were broadcasting live, shouting about the latest viral scoop. They were comparing the tech genius to the tarot master who sat outside the police station. They pointed out the voice and the canvas bag were identical to the seer who predicted those scammers' deaths. I stopped chewing my crab meat for a second when I realized they were talking about me. The woman at the next table squealed into her camera, asking if this master was a crime fighter now. The internet was exploding with bounties, and some CEO had offered $1 million just for a consultation. I lowered my head and quickly stuffed a piece of salmon into my mouth, enjoying the freshness. The meat was fresh and sweet, but I suddenly lost my appetite. I didn't want to be an influencer, let alone be surrounded like a circus freak. The system's life missions have time and area limits. Outside the zone, I'm just an ordinary patient. If people cornered me for readings and I failed, my reputation would hit rock bottom. Enraged believers are often the first ones to turn into a lynch mob. I finished my last bite of steak and wiped my mouth. I needed to find a place with high-end security. I stood up and hurried out of the restaurant, trying to stay invisible. A short while later, I was at the sales office for Cloud Top number 1. Sitting on a leather sofa, I felt a bit self-conscious. It wasn't about the money, it was the light. One side effect of the chemo was that bright light caused a stabbing pain in my eyes. In front of me, the salesman, Xiao Wang, was pointing at a model with a laser. He talked until his mouth was dry, but he didn't know what to make of me. I was pale as a corpse and hadn't uttered a single word. If it weren't for the 7-figure balance on my card, he probably would have called security. He pointed to the very top of the model, the penthouse with a river view. 300 square meters, perfect feng shui, and a symbol of ultimate status. I felt a sudden wave of dizziness and told him, "It's high enough. Take me to see it." He pressed the remote. The curtains drew shut and the lights dimmed. My tense body finally started to relax, but then I heard it. A low-frequency hum, something a normal person wouldn't notice, but the chemo had sharpened my hearing. It was the wind whistling between the skyscrapers, vibrating against the glass like a low moan. The sound stabbed directly into my brain, and I pressed my fingers to my temples. Xiao Wang stared at me, mouth agape, claiming the triple-pane German glass was soundproof even against thunder. I walked to the window and pointed at the corner of the office building across the street. The reflection from that angle hit the master bedroom, and the airflow was creating a localized resonance. But to Xiao Wang, my actions meant something else entirely. There I was, dressed in all black with dark sunglasses and a deathly pale face, pointing into the void. I was talking about things no one else could hear, and a chill ran down Xiao Wang's neck. I pushed through the splitting headache, barely managing to force out a few words. I tried to explain the glare and the wind noise, but my voice was raspy and hollow. When the words hit Xiao Wang's ears, his face went white as he remembered a previous client who had died here. That client had complained about strange noises at night too, and now Wang was trembling, begging me not to joke. I didn't have the energy to explain, so I just turned around and walked out. "Show me another one," I said, lower down, quieter, and away from that corner. Xiao Wang didn't dare hesitate and ran after me, looking at my back with newfound terror. Half an hour later, we were on the 5th floor of Building 3, facing the Central Park and the shadows of the trees. The camphor trees filtered the sunlight and blocked the noise, but as I stepped inside, the pain in my chest flared up. The noise level dropped significantly. Quiet, cool, and comfortable. I'll take this one. The paperwork was fast. The place was fully furnished and ready for move-in. I only paid for a year's rent, since I don't even know if I'll be alive next year. At sunset, the movers arrived, though they were mostly there to throw things away. I had them toss the moldy blankets and the broken table from my old basement. My entire life fit into one box: a few clothes, my canvas bag, and that folding stool. I sank into the sofa, feeling completely sheltered as I watched the tree shadows sway. No smell of mold, no drunks next door, and no more worrying about that basement tomb. I closed my eyes and thought, this is what it feels like to heal. But the peace didn't last long before an electric hum buzzed in my mind. I haven't even had a hot meal yet, and it's already time to get back to work. New mission: Shantan International Bilingual Kindergarten, from 4 to 5 p.m. Method: fortune-telling and divination. Goal: 3 successful readings. The previous missions were at the civil registry and the police station, life and death. Now a kindergarten? All I can picture are kids running wild and needing to be fed. Predicting the future for a group of kids who can't even write their own names? Predicting what? I muttered. Who's going to be the class president? Shantan International was the most exclusive private school in the city. The parents there aren't like the ones I fooled with a few lines at the registry. They aren't like the desperate police families. These people value their children's lives more than their own. Setting up a stall there is a gamble. I'll be lucky if the guards don't arrest me as a kidnapper. I looked at the stool by the sofa and realized they were really making this difficult for me. But I have no choice. Even with the latest reward, I have less than 4 months left to live. The city lights merged into a sea of gold as I ran a hand through my hair, ready for tomorrow. I turned around and pulled a pen and paper from my canvas bag. This divination has to look professional. If I just write fortune teller, the guards will get to me before the clients do. I thought for a moment and wrote Introduction to Classical Culture in bold letters. If I phrase it right, divination is just high-level talent evaluation. So I finished the line and folded the paper. I used a piece of red paper I bought for 50 cents, with only 30 minutes left until the mission began. I grabbed my canvas bag, tucked the peeling stool under my arm, and headed out the door. Shantan International sits right on the edge of the city's wealthiest district, and it was almost time for pickup. The 4-lane avenue in front of the entrance was a complete gridlock of luxury cars. The spirit of ecstasy on a Rolls-Royce had gleamed in the sun next to a row of Bentleys. Through the tinted windows, I could see private chauffeurs in white gloves sitting perfectly upright. There were several high-end minivans with dual registration plates, their electric side doors sliding open. Nannies in crisp uniforms stood ready with water bottles and towels, waiting for the children. I stepped out of my taxi near a garden just a few meters from the school gate, the perfect bottleneck. I set down my bag, unfolded my stool, and spread out a faded blue cloth on the ground, right there on the cold cement. Finally, I pulled out a cardboard sign that read, Bone Reading to Discover Talent. The future is revealed at age 3. Only 3 consultations per day, then I'm gone. But I had barely sat down when 2 men in black security uniforms approached me, carrying riot gear. The guards here were much harder to deal with than the ones at the civil registry. They were all over 6 feet tall and walked with a heavy, intimidating stride. One of them looked at my stall and spat out a sunflower seed shell. This is a private school, he barked. Setting up stalls is prohibited here. The one who looked like the boss pointed at a surveillance camera nearby. Get lost now, or we'll have to take measures. I didn't move, I just pointed at the tiles beneath my feet. I traced the joint between them and said, this is a public sidewalk, planned and owned by the city council. The line marking the school's property is up there, on that step. I haven't crossed it. The guard looked down to check the boundary. Sure enough, I was sitting exactly 10 centimeters away from the red line. Doesn't matter, he growled. You're an eyesore. He reached out to snatch my sign. I pocketed my seeds, pulled out my phone, and opened the city's official complaint portal. I'm not blocking the tactile path for the blind, nor am I blocking an emergency exit. Touch me, and I'll report you for abuse of authority, and I'll upload the video online too. I just kept eating my seeds while the parents waiting for their kids started noticing the commotion. A group of young mothers in expensive suits gathered, clutching their Birkin bags. They pointed in my direction and whispered, why haven't the guards kicked him out? Bone reading? How outdated. Inside, I scoffed. Scammers these days really aren't putting in the effort anymore. He looks so gloomy and his face is deathly pale. It's not normal. What if he has something? Something contagious? I need to tell my son to stay far away from him. If someone said I was an addict, the crowd would have believed them in a heartbeat. I heard every word, but I didn't even blink. Right then, a woman in a long burgundy velvet dress took off her sunglasses. She stared at my profile for a few seconds, then looked away to check her phone. She pulled up a blurry video that had been circulating for a few days. It was the footage of the fortune teller at the civil registry, grainy and only showing my side profile. But that posture, sitting on a stool and ignoring the world, was a perfect match. It's him, she murmured. Who is he, Mrs. Zhang? Do you know him? The short-haired woman beside her asked. Mrs. Zhang handed over the phone. Look at this video. Doesn't he look like the man who predicted that marriage fraud? The short-haired woman looked at the screen and then back at me. That's just a show, right? The internet says it was staged. The police issued a statement. How could it be staged? Mrs. Zhang countered in a low voice. Besides, they say that business with the detectives a few days ago involved him too. My husband, Wong, mentioned it. He says several big shots in his circle are looking for him. If we want to know if he's real, we just have to test him. Just as they were talking, the music played and the school gates slowly swung open, sending the parents rushing forward. A group of children dressed in English-style uniforms filed out in a neat line. Mrs. Zhang's eyes lit up, and she started waving frantically at the queue. A chubby boy, his blazer so tight the buttons were screaming, came running out. He clutched an Ultraman toy, cookie crumbs still clinging to the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Zhang grabbed her son, but instead of heading to the car, she pulled him toward me. She pointed at me and whispered, "Look at that man over there, AO." I looked up right then, our eyes meeting, and she instinctively clutched her phone. "Master?" she asked tentatively, her tone far more respectful than before. I tossed my seed shells into a trash bag and brushed the dust off my hands. "I read Talent and Destiny," I said. 1,000 per session, or whatever you feel like giving." "That's so cheap," Mrs. Zhang blurted out without thinking. The surrounding parents froze. A single horse riding lesson here cost 3,000 minimum. She pushed her son forward. "Please, take a look at my AO. I just want to know if he's Harvard material or Yale material." The boy squirmed, whining, "I don't want to. I want to go eat meat." I reached out and squeezed his chubby arm. It was soft, pure fat, no bone in sight. As I touched him, lines of red data flickered over the boy's head. Bone density, average. Motor control, low. Sensory acuity for taste and smell, elite. Verdict, top-tier dark chef. I pulled my hand back and looked at the mother. "Forget Harvard and Yale," I told her bluntly. "In this life, it's just not happening. He's a bit of a glutton, sure, but he's brilliant," she insisted. "Even his piano teacher says he has large, powerful hands." I let out a long sigh. "Ma'am, do you actually want the truth?" I pointed toward the street, far beyond the school gates. "He's never making it to Harvard, but at the New East Culinary Academy? I guarantee he'd be top of his class." The bustling crowd around us went dead silent for a heartbeat. Then, the entire sidewalk exploded into fits of laughter. "New East? Oh, I can't breathe. That is brutal. Millions spent on an international kindergarten just to end up a line cook." Parents were doubling over, clutching their stomachs and slapping their thighs. Even the bodyguards had to turn away, their shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Mrs. Zhang's face turned a deep, bruised shade of purple. You're talking absolute nonsense." She yanked her son behind her and shoved a finger right in my face. "Do you have any idea how much we spend on his education every year? Piano, horseback riding, golf? We spend $2 million a year on private tutors alone. And you have the nerve to say he's going to be a cook?" The diamond necklace on her chest rose and fell with her ragged breathing. "You're a fraud. Security. Where the hell is security? The money you spend and the talent a child actually possesses are two very different things." I pointed to the boy's wrist, noting that beneath the baby fat, his bones were unusually wide. "That joint is incredibly flexible. In the art of bone reading, we call this the cloud and rain hand." Mrs. Zhang froze, her jaw dropping as I continued my analysis. "Wait, that actually sounds quite prestigious," she muttered, and I nodded. "It is. These are the hands of a natural-born master chef. His fingers are short and thick, his palms are fleshy. He doesn't fear the heat of a stove. His internal sense of temperature control is precise." I paused and looked the boy straight in the eye. "Hey kid, let me ask you something. Do you actually like playing the piano?" The boy, who hadn't stopped fidgeting, suddenly went dead still and shouted, "I hate it. It's too hard. It sounds terrible, and the teacher's metronome is so annoying." Mrs. Zhang panicked. "What nonsense. Didn't you play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star for Grandma yesterday?" "I only did that so she'd buy me a burger." The boy exposed her without mercy. The crowd erupted in laughter again as I asked him, "Then what do you actually like doing?" His face lit up instantly as he tossed the mud from his hands and started gesturing wildly. "I like making round meatballs out of mud. And another thing. Mom, your cooking is awful. It's really, really bad. It just tastes like salt." Mrs. Zhang's face turned bright red, but the boy was on a roll now. And I know the secret. I spied on her last time she made it. She put in a huge chunk of yellow rock sugar and some black liquid, then let it simmer for a long time. The laughter around us died down as the parents who knew how to cook realized something. The boy had just described the exact key steps for making authentic braised pork. A child this young hadn't just observed the process. He had memorized every detail. I looked at Mrs. Zhang and delivered the final blow. "Ma'am, your son's taste buds are 10 times more sensitive than the average person's. His ability to analyze flavors is a divine gift from the heavens. If you keep forcing him to bang on piano keys, you're murdering a future 3-star Michelin chef." Mrs. Zhang stared at her son's glowing face, an expression she never saw at the piano. She probably thought of that expensive German Steinway sitting at home, covered in dust. The boy always preferred playing with pots and pans in the kitchen over that instrument. Was his destiny really to be a cook? The truth was staring her right in the face. Mrs. Zhang grit her teeth and reached into her limited edition handbag. She pulled out a thick stack of pink bills, easily totaling 2,000 yuan. Without even counting them, she slammed the cash onto the blue tablecloth in front of me. Fine, she snapped. You win. She grabbed the boy's hand and turned to leave, her footsteps slightly unsteady. Halfway out, she stopped, looked down at her son, and asked, Do you really want to learn to cook? The boy nodded with all his might. Yes, I want to learn how to make giant chicken legs. Mrs. Zhang sighed and muttered to herself, Fine, I'll sign you up for a kids' baking class when we get home. A crisp notification from the system echoed in my mind as I stuffed the wad of cash into my pocket. The parents who were just watching for fun weren't laughing anymore. They realized that I actually knew what I was talking about. The crowd began to stir, and the distance they had kept from my stall vanished instantly. Parents started shoving each other to get to the front of the line. Everyone wanted the best spot to talk to me. Master, look at my daughter. My son is always daydreaming. Does he have what it takes for science? I ignored the chaotic noise and scanned the crowd. My gaze locked onto a man struggling to push his way through the mob. He wore gold-rimmed glasses and an impeccably tailored three-piece suit. His hair was styled to perfection, and he was holding a little girl's hand. The girl wore a neat school uniform, her back perfectly straight and her face completely expressionless. The man forced people aside until he reached my small table. Master, what you did just now wasn't exactly a miracle, he said, adjusting his glasses. Anyone could see that fat kid was a glutton. I don't need my fortune told. He pulled the girl forward with an expression of extreme pride. I came to show you a real prodigy and see if you can actually recognize true talent. This is my daughter, Lin Xiaoman, a genius who memorized 300 poems by age 3. By 5, she was doing complex mental math, and now she's teaching herself calculus. I heard the whispers from the crowd about this child prodigy. Wasn't she the one who took first place in the last math Olympiad? The parents around us murmured that she was destined for the top universities. Hearing the praise, the man puffed out his chest with arrogant pride. Master, check her bones. Tell me if she's the reincarnation of Einstein himself. I didn't answer him. My eyes were locked onto the girl, Xiaoman. She was barely 6 years old, but her face lacked any spark of childhood. Her expression was a total blank as she stood in a perfect, frozen posture. I reached out instinctively, and the father stepped back to let me read her bones. My palm rested gently against the back of her neck. Her skin was cold, and she shivered under my touch, but didn't move. Suddenly, my fingers tensed as the system's vision flooded my mind. I had never seen anything like this in my life. There was no golden aura of talent surrounding her. There was no red code indicating a special ability like the one AOAO had. Instead, the girl's cerebral cortex was a dull, sickly grayish-white. It was a terminal sign of extreme mental exhaustion and overexertion. She wasn't a genius. She was a child being pushed past her breaking point. A dense, black mist swirled between her brows, thick and suffocating. Her skeletal development was already showing signs of severe, forced delay. Subscribe. The system's diagnostic was clear: extreme stress overload. Her cognitive domain was in a state of total chaos. High-frequency cerebral activity, memory area overheated, logic area practically inactive, psychological state, extreme terror, people-pleasing personality, symptoms of dissociative disorder. Talent verdict, fake. Rote memory, S rank. My hand remained on the back of the girl's neck. I stayed like that for so long that the father started to get impatient. Can't figure it out, the man mocked. Or have you just never seen a bone structure this perfect before? I slowly withdrew my hand and looked at the man's face, which was full of vanity. Then I looked down at the motionless girl, and she noticed my gaze. She forced her lips into a docile, perfect smile, one she had clearly rehearsed 1,000 times. I picked up the thermos from the table and unscrewed the lid. She's not a genius, I said, taking a sip of water to clear my throat. She's just a very accomplished actress. The man's face turned bright red with fury, his eyes glaring behind his gold-rimmed glasses. An actress? Are you saying a 5-year-old is faking it? He shoved his daughter forward and barked. Xiaoman, recite the preface to the Prince of Tongue's Pavilion. It was like he flipped a switch. Her smile didn't change, but her lips began to move rapidly. A torrent of complex ancient text flowed out of her mouth at a steady, emotionless pace. Her eyes were vacant, focusing on nothing at all. Her mouth kept spitting out syllables that, for a 5-year-old, held no meaning. The parents around us gasped in awe, whispering, My God, she knows the whole thing. The man puffed out his chest and raised his chin high. He looked at me and sneered. Did you hear that? Is this the actress you were talking about? Just as the girl recited a verse about clouds and sunsets, I reached out a finger. I touched her right between the eyebrows and said, Stop. The girl's voice cut off instantly, her eyes blinking in a moment of pure confusion. She doesn't even know what she's reciting, I said, looking the man in the eye. She just recorded these sounds in her brain like a machine. So what? The man shot back. Being able to memorize that is a talent in itself. It's a talent, sure, I replied, but at what cost? I pointed toward the girl's hands, which were twisted tightly together in front of her. The nails on her index fingers and thumbs were chewed down to the raw flesh. The skin around the edges was torn and weeping with thin threads of blood. This is severe anxiety, I said coldly. The man's expression shifted, and he tried to hide his daughter's hands from view. I didn't stop. I knelt down to bring my eyes level with the little girl's. When you looked at your father just now, I didn't see love in your eyes, I whispered. I only saw terror, the fear of being locked in that windowless study if you miss a single word. The man panicked and shouted, "Shut up, you're manipulating her. I'm calling the police." He reached out his hand to grab his daughter. He wanted to pull her away from me immediately. I didn't move an inch. "Xiaoman, let's go. Don't listen to this crazy person's nonsense." But the moment his hand touched the girl's shoulder, a scream tore through the air. The usually quiet Xiaoman suddenly exploded, shaking off her father's hand. She clutched her head and curled into a ball on the floor. She kept reciting the ancient text while sobbing, her face covered in tears and snot. The words spilling from her mouth were distorted. They became faster and more confused with every passing second. "I don't want to recite anymore. I don't want to. Dad, please don't hit me." The surrounding parents recoiled in horror at the sight. Some of the other children were so frightened they began to cry as well. The man's hand froze in midair, his face turning as pale as wax. I didn't hit her," he tried to explain, but the words died in his throat. The girl's collapse was real, and the bone-deep fear radiating from her was undeniable. She wasn't acting like a genius for the crowd. She was acting to survive, desperate not to disappoint her father or face punishment. To stay safe, she had forced herself to become nothing more than a machine. I stood up and brushed the dust off my pants. "Take her to see a psychologist," I told the man, looking him dead in the eye. "You still have time, but in 2 more years, that string is going to snap completely. She won't be a genius anymore. She'll be the seed of a high IQ sociopath. And when that happens, she won't just destroy herself, she'll destroy you too." The man froze in place, staring at his daughter, sobbing on the floor. His masterpiece, the one he was so proud of, was now lying there in pieces. He knelt down and, for the first time, didn't give her an order. He just hugged her awkwardly and whispered, "No more, my girl, no more. Daddy was wrong." He picked up his shaking daughter, leaving her backpack forgotten on the ground. He stumbled toward his Audi parked at the curb and sped off like a man possessed. "Valid fortune readings, 23. The system's voice echoed in my head. I let out a long sigh as a deathly silence fell over the street. Everyone was staring at me, just a young man sitting on a small plastic stool. Then, the crowd erupted into a total frenzy. "Master, please look at my son. He's a bit slow, but he's very obedient." "Master, I'll pay 100,000. I don't even need to skip the line. Just give me a turn." Luxury cars blocked the entire street as billionaire CEOs shoved each other like old ladies at a market. I frowned and checked my phone. 4:55 p.m. 5 minutes left. Suddenly, a heavy engine roar drowned out the chaos. A deep, steady rumble of a high-end executive sedan. The back door opened respectfully, and a foot wearing a simple black cloth shoe stepped onto the pavement. It was followed by a dragon-headed cane that struck the ground with a sharp thud. The moment they saw this old woman, the wealthy elite and their entourages froze. The wives and businessmen present went dead silent, their voices caught in their throats. Several of them were vice presidents of massive conglomerates, yet they lowered their gaze. They bowed their heads immediately, not even daring to breathe too loudly. It was the matriarch of the Sun family, the legendary founder of the city's commercial empire. The old woman leaned on her cane, moving with a slow but unshakable rhythm. She walked with a steady pace, heading straight toward my small stall. The crowded mass of people parted like the Red Sea as she approached. They moved automatically, carving out a wide path for her to pass through. I stopped packing my things and looked up at her. I watched the old woman as she drew closer, my eyes narrowing as I focused my vision. In my sight, the aura of fortune above her head was blindingly powerful. It was a brilliant, radiant golden glow that signaled immense wealth and status. But beneath that golden light, something else was leaking through. A gray, deathly aura was beginning to seep into her life force. The old woman stopped right in front of me and looked me over with calm, calculating eyes. "Young man," she said, her voice slightly raspy from age. Despite her years, her tone was still sharp and full of command. "Is there one reading left?" she asked, and I replied, "Just one. What do you want to know?" Chapter 13, The $10 billion Heir. "No, he's just a wasteful brat." I looked at the old woman standing right in front of me. Behind her, her bodyguards in black suits fanned out, turning their backs to the crowd. They used brute force to carve out a pocket of absolute peace and quiet. A 3-meter empty circle formed around us in an instant. The surrounding noise vanished, and I stuffed my leftover sunflower seeds into my pocket. "I want to know if he can take the reins of the business," she said, gripping her cane. The dragon-headed cane struck the ground with a dull thud as she looked at the boy. The child standing by her leg wore a tiny custom-tailored suit with a crooked bow tie. He looked bored to death. He was about to shove a finger up his nose when the old woman slapped his hand away. He didn't care at all. His eyes were fixed on a stray cat near my stall. "This is the sole heir of the Sun family. Young Master Senator, what is your fee?" I told her I'd take whatever, then pointed to the small stool for him to sit. The boy sat down begrudgingly, squirming as if the chipped wooden stool was too hard for him. I reached out to read his bone structure, but the bodyguards immediately stepped forward. Their hands went inside their jackets, but the old woman raised a finger to stop them. I placed my palm on the crown of the boy's head, feeling his soft, fine hair. Lines of glowing red text flashed directly before my eyes. Bone structure scan complete. Flat parietal bone, too wide. The ridges are weak, lacking any aura of authority, and the occipital bone chain is incomplete. He lacks the ancestral piety of Nan Cheng, with exposed nostrils and thin nasal wings. It's a classic sign of money leaking away like water. There are wide gaps between his fingers, and his palm is flat. It's thin, lacking the treasure bowl structure that holds onto wealth. His Yima star is prominent, indicating a wandering, unstable life of constant travel. Fate's verdict: a born spendthrift, an elite wanderer, and a family ruiner. I held my hand on the boy's neck for 3 seconds, then moved it down his spine. He's flexible, but this kid doesn't know how to stay still. I pulled a wet wipe from my pocket, cleaned my hands, and looked directly at the old woman. Ma'am, as is custom, I should ask you a question first, but I'm already thirsty. Enough. I don't have time for nonsense, she snapped, gesturing for me to get to the point. I looked her in the eye and said, this child cannot inherit the business. The gossiping parents nearby went silent, and the bodyguard's jaws tightened as they tensed up. The old woman's knuckles turned white as her grip on the cane tightened. The reason, she demanded, so I pointed to the boy's hand. Look at his long fingers and thin palm. You could fit a credit card through the gaps when he closes them. He is a natural-born drifter, restless, unstable, and destined to waste every cent he touches. He can't stay in this city, let alone be trapped in an office. If you insist on leaving him the $10 billion family fortune, and force him into the chairman's seat to sign documents. I paused, watching the boy try to crush an ant with the tip of his shoe. In less than 10 years, he'll wipe out the entire Zen family legacy. He'd sell the whole group just to buy a boat ticket to travel the world. Or to see penguins in Antarctica, he'd pawn off one of your subsidiaries. The wrinkles on the old woman's face tightened as her skin turned pale. Are you telling me the only grandson of the Zen family is a common spendthrift? The bodyguards stepped forward, their shadows completely engulfing my small stall. I didn't move an inch from my stool and simply reached for my thermos. Being a spendthrift is relative, I said calmly. In the world of business, he's a disaster. But in other fields, he's a genius. He has an innate sensitivity for the novel. He possesses an insatiable curiosity for the unknown. If your family has more money than you could spend in several lifetimes, then letting him spend it is actually a good deed. He'll become a world-class explorer or a great philanthropist. The fortune he gives away will return to you as fame and legacy. But if you force him to earn money, he'll lose every cent you've saved for your coffin. The boy, who usually looked lifeless, suddenly snapped his head up. Grandma, if I'm the chairman, can I go hunt lions? The old woman paused, but the boy shook his head so fast it was a blur. No, then I don't want it. I want to go to Africa, Antarctica, even Mars. This stupid kindergarten is a disaster. It's so boring. Every single day, I just have to memorize things. The boy's cheeks flushed with an excitement he never showed at home. The kid who usually walked with his head down finally looked alive. A child destined to give away fortunes, the old woman muttered to herself. She was repeating my words, letting them sink in. Suddenly, she threw her head back and let out a sharp laugh. Ha ha, fine. A child destined to give away fortunes. She slammed her cane against the pavement with a heavy thud. My family has built this empire over 3 generations of business. If we can't afford to support one boy who spends it, then these decades were for nothing. She turned her gaze back to me, her eyes sharp. You're the first person brave enough to call my grandson a spendthrift to my face. She gestured, and a bodyguard offered me a gold-rimmed business card and a black card. She tossed them onto my blue cloth and said, if you're ever in trouble, use the Zen family name. I didn't even look at the cards. I just bundled the cloth up with the trash and the cash. Work was done for the day, so I stood up and stuffed my things into my bag. I grabbed my canvas sack and my small stool with fluid, practiced movements. The old woman looked at me, completely bewildered. Wait, don't you want the money? She asked. I didn't even turn around as I kept moving. I don't work overtime, I said, waving a hand dismissively behind me. I left that black card sitting right there on the concrete floor. In my past life, I was weighed down by too many karmic ties. I couldn't handle any more burdens, so I disappeared into the crowd. I slipped through the wall of parents and bodyguards thanks to my thin frame. As I broke free, glowing text began to flicker before my eyes. Mission accomplished. Brain cancer cell activity reduced by 10%. Lifespan extended by 40 days. 3 million yuan in cash rewards deposited into my account. I picked up my pace, feeling the immediate change in my body. The heavy weight that usually crushed my chest was gone. My breathing became light and effortless for the first time in ages. I felt so good I almost wanted to slap the hood of a passing Rolls-Royce. I hailed a taxi, hopped in, and told the driver to just get me out of this street. Behind me, the crowd stood frozen, staring at the black card I'd left in the dirt. The millions were just lying there on the ground. The Sun family matriarch watched me disappear, then slowly leaned down. She picked up the card, tapped it against her finger, and smiled. I sat in the corner of my sofa, poking at a cup of instant noodles with a plastic fork. The curtains were drawn tight, leaving only a tiny sliver of light. The midday sun cut through the gap, creating a blinding streak across the floor. The rest of my apartment remained buried in shadows. I took a sip of the salty broth and checked the trending topics on my phone. A hashtag in dark red caught my eye, the kindergarten genius and the #1 wastrel. The feed was exploding with photos of me at the school gates from earlier today. My cap was pulled low, making it impossible to see my face from that distance. but my black windbreaker and that scuffed, peeling stool were visible in every shot. The comment section was moving so fast I could barely keep up. One user wrote, "I can't believe he told the son matriarch her grandson was a loser to her face." Another replied, "And she just took it. She actually said her family could afford to be losers." A third comment read, "Am I the only one obsessed with the fortune teller? He looks so cool." Someone else chimed in, "I looked up his clothes. That jacket is a discontinued model from 2 years ago. And that stool? You can get it on a discount app for 9 yuan with free shipping. His whole outfit costs less than 200 yuan, yet he threw away 5 million without looking back." I chewed on my soggy noodles and thought, I only don't care about money because I finally have it. The doorbell rang, so I set down my soup and checked the peephole. A delivery man in a yellow uniform stood there holding a bag of fruit. I opened the door without removing my mask or lowering my hood. As I took the bag, the delivery man stared intently at my jacket. He looked at it for a few seconds and suddenly burst out laughing. "Whoa, man," he said, pointing at my clothes. "Are you riding the wave too?" I didn't understand what he meant, so I just stared back. "The trend," he continued. "Everyone is wearing this exact black windbreaker now. Some of them are even carrying around those little stools. I just passed the park and saw a whole line of people cosplaying that master." The delivery man looked me up and down with a grin. "But yours actually looks real," he noted. "Even the frayed cuffs look identical. Where did you buy it? Come on, send me the link, won't you?" I looked down at my faded cuffs and realized he thought I was a poser. "They're cheap fakes," I told him. 50 yuan for 2 if you buy them in a group." He gave me a thumbs up and said, "I hope you get more famous than the real master." He headed down the stairs humming a song while I shut the door. I walked to the bathroom and peeled off the jacket the entire internet was hunting for. I threw it in the wash, knowing if I wore it again, I'd be swarmed by a mob. For the next 3 days, I didn't set a single foot outside my house. I survived on delivery food and bought a few things online to change my look. A few plaid shirts, black-rimmed glasses, and a bucket hat should do the trick. If people didn't recognize me, I could actually have a life, but outside, things had spiraled out of control. The Sun family matriarch had spread the word, "Find this master, and the family would owe you a favor." That favor was worth millions, and my phone suddenly vibrated with a call from Officer Xiaoji. "Hello? You still alive?" Xiaoji asked, the sound of him flipping through files audible over the line. "Thanks to your help, I am," I replied, but he told me to stay low for a while. He warned me that several big shots at the station were asking about me, and the Sun family was hunting me down too. "Right now, you're the crown jewel," he said, "but you're also a political hot potato." I told him I hadn't done anything illegal, and he sighed, knowing I was right. He mentioned that thanks to me, they saved young Sang's leg, even if he'd be stuck behind a desk now. "If you get into trouble or someone bothers you, call me," he added before I hung up. I walked to the window and pulled the curtains back just enough to see the city neon staining the sky red. 3 days of fame, and my supplies were already gone, leaving me with only the last sip of instant noodle soup. Deep in my mind, a faint static sound echoed, and I knew it was starting again. I tilted my head back, drained the cold soup, and thought, God or fraud, everyone has to eat. New mission assigned, Panjiajuan Antique Market, East Gate Morning Market, from 9 to 11 a.m. Method, character divination. Objective, serve 3 clients and successfully verify the authenticity of their pieces. I stared at the mission panel and realized the antique market was going to be a Shark Tank. Those guys are masters of the hustle, spinning tales about Emperor Wu over a broken brick. Hunting for treasures in a place like that is like walking straight into a wolf's den. I checked my remaining lifespan on the panel, 98 days. I have no choice. I went to the closet, pulled on a new blue and white plaid shirt, and put on some fake black-rimmed glasses. The person in the mirror looked awkward and dull, like a fresh grad programmer looking for work. Not a single trace of the master remained. Perfect. I nodded at my reflection. Tomorrow, I go treasure hunting. Chapter 15, Telling Truth from Lies in a Land of Fakes. 9 a.m. at the Panjiajuan Gate. The bluestone pavement was already burning hot under my feet. The crowd was mostly old men in traditional jackets, spinning walnuts in their palms to pass the time. Streamers with selfie sticks shouted at their cameras, while vendors displayed mud-covered clay pots. There were jade bracelets, stacks of old coins, and even a chamber pot supposedly used by the first emperor. I found an empty spot by a wall. To my left, a vendor was rubbing shoe polish onto a bronze vessel. To my right, a coin dealer had a sign that read, "Unique piece. We'll trade for a house." I set down my folding stool, spread out a blue cloth, and pulled a printed sheet of paper from my bag. I taped it to the brick in front of me. It read, "Authenticity divination. 1 word is all I need. If I'm wrong, you don't pay. 3 clients only, then I'm gone." The font was a plain, standard size 4. It looked like something I'd just cut out of a boring office document. I sat down and pulled some napkins from my pocket, stolen from a breakfast stall, to clean my glasses. The coin dealer next to me was a middle-aged bald man named Wang, clutching a round copper coin. It had a square hole in the center, and he brought it to his lips to blow on it. He glanced at me, at my plaid shirt, jeans, and sneakers, and tossed the coin back onto his stall. "Hey kid," old Wang said with a clink. "You're in the wrong place, aren't you? The job center is that way. Take a left. This is an antiques market." I huffed some breath onto my lenses and slid my glasses on. "I'm not lost. I'm just doing a little side hustle to make some extra cash." Old Wang burst out laughing, flashing yellow teeth as he gestured to the stalls around us. This business requires a sharp eye, you get it? And here you are with your word-reading nonsense. Are you here to ruin business, or just play the clown? A sharp eye? I don't think you have one. I pointed directly at Old Wang's stall. I looked at his pile of copper coins and said, that stack of kanji tong bao coins. They're all laser engraved. No one with a sharp eye would ever buy those. Old Wang's hand trembled, and cigarette ash fell right onto his shoe. Watch your mouth, kid. Don't talk nonsense. He lowered his voice and glared at me. Don't you know the rules? You see it, but you don't judge it. I didn't bother responding. I pulled out my stainless steel thermos and took a sip of hot water. The spasm in my stomach eased up just a little bit. I don't look at the merchandise, I said, setting the thermos down. I only look at the word. If the word is true, the object is authentic. If the word is false, the object is a fake. Old Wang let out a mocking laugh and turned his back on me. Fine, have fun starving to death. I stared at a wild weed growing in the crack between the floor bricks. Being here was a mission. If I failed, the cancer cells would throw a party in my brain. Boss, can you tell if something is authentic? A voice called out from above me. I looked up to see a young man in his 20s, wearing a backpack and a sweat-soaked windbreaker. He was clutching an object wrapped tightly in old newspaper. He kept glancing back every 2 steps, his neck stiff with paranoia. A total rookie who thought he'd found a treasure and feared someone would steal it. I said, pointing to the sign on the ground. Word reading. Write a word, and I'll judge your object. The young man looked puzzled. You're not even going to look at the item? No magnifying glass needed, I replied. The object is in your bag, but the energy is here. He hesitated, knowing other stalls charged 200 yuan for an appraisal and had long lines. My sign said, if it's not accurate, you don't pay. He crouched down, placed the newspaper bundle on his knees, and picked up the pen. He wrote the character for treasure. It was crooked, with a long, trailing final stroke. He lowered his voice and peeled back a corner of the paper to reveal a faint, deep blue glaze. The owner said it's a Ming Dynasty blue and white porcelain bowl from a folk kiln. He needed money fast, so he sold it for 5,000. This quality should be worth at least 50,000. Beside us, Old Wang craned his neck, took one look at the blue tint, and curled his lip. A fake from a mile away, Panjiayuan Market was crawling with junk like that. The top of the character represents a home and a roof. I spoke calmly, my voice steady. In this specific character, the roof is written too wide, covering the jade radical below. This piece isn't from the ancients. It's not from an imperial kiln or even a decent folk kiln. It was made in a small family workshop. The young man's smile froze as he stammered that folk kilns still have value. But I wasn't finished. I pointed my finger directly at the dot in the jade radical. You pressed too hard on this dot, making the ink bleed. The dot isn't in the center, but at the base. That means the base of your piece is a trick. The jade at the bottom is just filler used to mimic an authentic seal. The bottom of your bowl was made by mixing jade powder with glue to hide the modern firing marks. Beside me, Old Wang stopped pretending to look at his phone and perked up his ears. That's a forgery technique that just started appearing. How did this kid know? The young man clutched the bowl tighter, his face turning pale. Impossible. I checked the Changhua reign mark of the great Ming Dynasty myself. The characters are clear and even show signs of natural wear. They're clear because they were engraved with steel and worn down with sandpaper. The young man stood up, agitated, shouting that I hadn't even touched the item. I tossed a 1 yuan coin onto the blue cloth and asked, do you dare to break it? The young man's eyes widened as he stammered. It cost me 5,000. If it's real, those 5,000 turn into 50,000. I patted my canvas bag and said, I'll pay you 100,000. But if it's fake, the break will reveal a layer of glue in the cut. It'll turn white from the heat and smell sour. The young man stared at me, then looked back down at the bowl in his arms. His excitement vanished, and his palms began to sweat. Inside, he was panicking. If it's fake, that's 2 months of my living expenses gone. I looked at him and suggested, then just get a lighter and heat the base. With trembling hands, he pulled a disposable lighter from his pocket. I told him to just heat it a little. If it's authentic, the fire won't hurt it. He flipped the bowl, revealing the Great Ming Dynasty Changhua inscription. The flame licked the bottom of the bowl for 1 second, then 2. Suddenly, a pungent, burnt smell filled the air. The grayish-white base began to bubble and turn black as the fake patina peeled away. The surface softened, revealing bright, new white porcelain underneath. And there, in tiny blue letters they hadn't finished sanding off, it said, microwave safe. The young man's grip went limp, and his face turned purple with rage. The 50,000 yuan Ming bowl slipped from his hands and shattered against the stone. Old Wang stared at the shards, stunned that I knew it was fake without even touching it. I ignored the young man's tantrum and focused on the task at hand. I leaned down, picked up my coin, blew off the dust, and slipped it back into my pocket. Next person, please. The crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they swarmed even closer. Word about the microwave safe bowl spread like wildfire through the market. Now, everyone was looking at me with a completely different level of respect. An old man in a gray Zhongshan suit pushed his way through the onlookers. His hair was silver, and he clutched a folding fan in one hand. With his other arm, he held a long brocade box high, terrified someone might bump it. Young man, let me try, he said, carefully placing the box on my blue cloth. Several auction houses have given me conflicting opinions on this piece. He didn't waste time. He grabbed the brush and wrote the word painting on the paper. I locked my eyes on the word, and the system interface flickered to life. Red lines began deconstructing the black ink, analyzing every stroke and boundary. The system's verdict: grafting flowers onto a different tree. The center is real, but the edges are altered. I glanced at the aura hovering over the old man's head. Gray threads were tangled within his white light, signaling a deceptive truth. Do you want the truth? I asked him. He nodded solemnly. There's no need to even open it, I said, pointing to the character he just wrote. The heart of the painting is authentic, but the signature and seals were cut from other works and stitched together. In the trade, they call that reviving a corpse in a stranger's body. A murmur rippled through the crowd as I spoke. The old man's face turned pale as he slowly opened the brocade box. Inside was a vertical landscape scroll, the paper yellowed with age. But the seam between the center and the border was visible to my eyes. Even with master-level repairs, the paper texture wasn't uniform. I stared at this for a week and couldn't be sure, the old man sighed. Experts told me it was authentic, but the calligraphy style felt off. He realized now it was a clever montage and bowed deeply toward me. If not for you, master, I would have thrown millions into the trash. He pulled a thick, bulging red envelope from his coat and set it on my cloth. Ding. Effective divinations, 2 out of 3. I didn't even open the envelope. I just slid it into my canvas bag. One consultation left, I announced to the swarming crowd. People started shoving, waving jade earrings, and shouting that they were first. In the chaos, an old scavenger in camouflage rags was being tossed around. He was just trying to collect plastic bottles when the mob dragged him to the front. Someone shoved him from behind, sending him crashing down right before my stall. His heavy sack hit the ground with a dull, metallic thud. Get out of the way, old man, the crowd jeered. This is a place for antiques. I watched him struggle and whispered, thank you. Wait, I said, stopping the old scavenger in his tracks. I stared at his heavy sack and asked, what do you have in there? The old man shrank back, stammering that it was nothing at all. Just a piece of scrap iron I found at a construction site by the river, he muttered. He said he was going to sell it for scrap just to buy a meal. Take it out, I commanded. Let me see it. He hesitated before untying the sack to reveal a dark, rusted hunk of metal. It was irregularly shaped, like a broken fragment of a massive circle. Caked in river mud and dried algae, it looked like a piece of a broken plow. The crowd around us erupted into mocking laughter at the sight of the junk. You want the master to appraise a piece of trash? Someone jeered. If that scrap is worth gold, I'll eat my entire stall, another shouted. They told him he'd be lucky to get 50 cents for a kilo of that rust. The old man turned bright red with shame and tried to hide the metal away. Don't move it, I said, my voice quiet but enough to silence the mob. I pushed a piece of paper toward him and told him to write a single word. He froze, admitting he only knew how to write one word: iron. He used to be a loader at a foundry, so iron was all he could manage. With trembling hands, he clumsily drew the character for iron on my paper. The man took a step back, terrified, as I told him it was his payment. The laughter around us died down instantly as people wondered if I'd lost my mind. Did they really think that piece of junk was worth 10 million? I ignored them, stood up, and walked toward the sack to point at the metal. I explained that the character for iron contains the symbols for gold and beast. Only after losing its original golden luster did its true nature reveal itself. Sir, what you have here is not scrap metal, I declared, my voice echoing through the market. This is a relic from the dawn of our civilization. It is a leg from the great iron ox, the very statues used to control the floods of the Yellow River. I told them to look closely at the markings and the remnants of the casting ribbons. I pointed to a faint inscription barely visible beneath the thick layers of rust. This is a national treasure, I said firmly. Those words fell like a hammer, followed by a silence that broke into even louder laughter. A national treasure? The fortune teller has finally gone insane. I guess every piece of iron found in the mud is from the Tang dynasty now. Old man Zeng stared at me, his face unreadable like a professional poker player. Don't even think about selling this to a scrapyard, I warned the old man. I told him to take it to the museum office and say there was nothing inside. Take it there and tell them exactly where you found it in the city. I told him to say he found it in the ruins of the old riverbed. The old man looked at me, then at the money on the ground, and I told him to take it for the taxi. I promised him that once he handed it over, the government would give him a certificate and a cash reward. That reward would be enough for his entire retirement. The old man didn't understand history, but he understood the look in my eyes. He grabbed the red envelope, hoisted his sack, bowed to me, and sprinted away. A chime rang in my head. Third divination mission complete. Calculating reward. Congratulations, host. Brain cancer cell activity has been reduced by 5%. Life expectancy increased by 30 days. You have received a cash reward of 1 million. I didn't stay a second longer. I packed up my stall, folded my things, and pushed through the crowd. Hey, don't leave, someone shouted. You trick people and then just run? The crowd behind me was still in an uproar, doubting if that scrap was really a national treasure. 10 minutes later, I was in a taxi far from the antique market when the market speakers blared. Urgent announcement. We request the elderly gentleman carrying the black iron object to report to the office immediately. It is a top-tier national treasure. Experts from the Provincial Cultural Relics Bureau have arrived. The entire Panjiayuan East Gate morning market exploded in an instant. The buyers and sellers who were mocking me moments ago stared at my empty spot with their mouths wide open. I had literally turned scrap iron into gold. My bank balance increased by another $1 million, but I knew money couldn't buy everything. Adding it all up, my net worth had already surpassed $5 million. For a terminally ill man who used to stress over a few thousand for medical bills, this was a fortune. But I didn't feel as happy as I had imagined. I walked through the luxury mall downtown, the air conditioning blasting at full power. I was still wearing my cheap blue and white checkered shirt and old sneakers. In my hands, I carried several paper bags from high-end brands I had just bought. I didn't even try the clothes on. I just grabbed my size and swiped the card. I passed an imported goods supermarket and stepped inside. I picked out the 2 most expensive yogurts they had and paid. I peeled back the lid. In the past, I would always lick the thick layer of yogurt stuck to the foil. It was a habit born from being poor. Now, I just glanced at that thick layer and tossed the lid straight into the trash. I took a sip, but the rich flavor just felt cloying and dull. I left the store and passed a high-end bridal boutique on the 2nd floor. A mermaid-cut wedding dress covered in crystals sat in the massive display window. The lights hit the fabric, creating an iridescent glow so beautiful I couldn't look away. Inside, a young couple was trying on outfits. The girl twirled in her gown while the boy snapped photos, his eyes full of light. I could buy every accessory in that shop for a bride. I could even buy half of that happy scene I once craved so much. But I couldn't buy the other half. If I weren't sick, I'd be thinking about getting married too. Maybe I'd be like that guy, acting like a fool with my phone in hand. I'd be worrying about dowries and mortgages, but I'd be full of life. I'd have a future. Now, I only have a past. My stomach churned. The chemo side effects were attacking again. I tossed the rest of the yogurt into a trash can and walked away. Back at the apartment I just rented, I stepped out of the elevator and saw him. Someone was standing at my door, Xiaoji. The vice captain of the Criminal Investigation Brigade wasn't in uniform today. He wore a wrinkled jacket and held a bag of apples while leaning against the wall. He was about to knock when he heard the elevator and turned around. "How did you find me?" I asked. Xiaoji shook the phone in his hand and gave a small smirk. "You didn't exactly try hard to hide," he said. "Finding a rental record isn't difficult." I opened the door and told him to come in. He set the apples on the coffee table and scanned the luxury apartment. Aside from a peeling stool, there was nothing personal here. It looked lifeless. "Ji has been acting strange lately. Is she sick?" I asked, hoping it was just that. Xiaoji frowned and said, "We took her to the hospital for CT scans. MRIs, blood tests, everything. They found absolutely nothing. She insists someone is talking to her. Auditory hallucinations. It's not just the voices," Xiaoji said, lowering his tone. "She says in her dreams, she always goes to a certain place. A very dark place where someone is scratching behind a wall. Shoo, shhh. And when she wakes up, her fingernails are packed with dirt." I looked at Xiaoji. "Thanks for the update. But you should be looking for a psychologist or a psychiatrist for that." "I already did," Xiaoji sighed. "She's in the mental health center right now. The doctor says it's acute schizophrenia. The meds do nothing. Yesterday she grabbed my hand and told me she couldn't take it. She said that person is almost out." He looked up at me with a trace of desperation in his eyes. "I know you have your gifts. I saw what you did in those previous cases. Could you go see her?" I set my glass down. At this moment, I hadn't received any new missions. In other words, I was just an ordinary cancer patient without a metabolic translator. I couldn't see auras. "Right now, I don't feel anything," I said with total sincerity. Xiaoji's eyes went dim. "I guess you need a connection for these things. I just don't know what else to do." He stood up to leave. Watching his broad but slightly hunched back, I remembered how he risked everything at the police station to save his team. "Wait," I stood up. "Take me to have a look, Xiaoji." He turned around instantly. "You really want to go?" I grabbed my jacket from the rack. "I'm not a doctor, and I can't guarantee I'll find anything. I'll just see if we can talk." An hour later, Xiaoji's car pulled up at the mental health center. The atmosphere was quiet, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The inpatient ward was at the back, facing a massive garden. That's where the patients go to get some fresh air. I followed Xiaoji toward the garden under the pleasant 10 a.m. sun. Patients in blue and white striped uniforms wandered across the grass. Some were talking to themselves, others gesturing at thin air. The moment I stepped into the garden, that familiar mechanical voice echoed in my mind. No warning. A new mission had been issued. I froze in my tracks for a split second. Location, garden bench. Time, 10 to 11 o'clock. Method, dream interpretation. Objective, successfully interpret the dreams of 3 clients to find the subconscious truth. I looked at the mission panel, and a smirk of resignation crossed my lips. This system really knows how to pick its moments, doesn't it? "What's wrong?" Xiaoji asked, noticing I had stopped and turned toward him. I looked toward a bench not too far away, my gaze turning sharp and deep. "What a coincidence," I told him. "I just got that feeling back. The truth is, sometimes, only the mad tell the truth." I walked over to an empty bench and sat down while Xiaoji stood guard behind me. I set out a small wooden stool and a scrap of paper that read, "Dream Interpretation." A man in his 30s approached, so thin his cheeks were sunken in. He was clutching a long-handled black umbrella. Even with the sun blazing, he huddled his body tight. He was hiding in his own shadow. The man crouched in front of me, keeping the edge of the umbrella low. His voice was a mere whisper as I activated my system vision. A damp, cold gray mist swirled over his head, its edges constantly fraying. "I'm not a demon," I said calmly. "I interpret dreams." He shivered and slowly looked up, revealing eyes shot through with blood. "I had the dream again last night," he muttered. "I dreamed I became an umbrella." He pointed to the black umbrella in his hand, his knuckles white. "But the fabric was torn and leaking," he said. "The rain was freezing. It soaked into my bones, like they were about to snap. Am I going to die?" Behind me, Xiao Ji frowned, but I remained silent as the system analysis appeared. Broken umbrella, lack of protection, cold rain, environmental erosion, subconscious reflection, recent death of a maternal relative, loss of his only pillar. This isn't a fear of death, but a fear of severed bonds. I looked at the trembling man and said, "You aren't crazy, and you aren't dying. You feel cold because the person who used to hold the umbrella for you is gone." His lips began to shake as the truth finally hit him. The black umbrella he had been clutching so tightly finally slipped from his trembling hands. The harsh sunlight hit him directly in the face. He didn't pull away as tears welled up in his eyes. "Mom," he sobbed, curling into a ball on the ground. "I miss my mom. I just wanted to protect her with the umbrella, even if it was just once." The madman, who thought he was an object, had vanished. In his place was just a son who had lost his mother. A nurse watching from a distance covered her mouth in shock. "That patient has been here for a month," she whispered. "He just crouches in corners and bites anyone who touches that umbrella." I picked up the umbrella and placed it back by the man's hand. "It's okay to cry," I told him. "The umbrella is still here. You can hold it now." He hugged the umbrella, and his whimpers turned into a gut-wrenching wail. The nurse rushed over to help him up and let him back inside. Xiao Ji watched them leave in silence while I turned my gaze toward a nearby tree. A young girl stood beneath it, her patient uniform hanging loose on her thin frame. Her face was as pale as wax, staring fixedly at the dirt without moving. Xiao Ji shivered beside me. "Xiaoya?" It was her, Xiao Ji's sister. Xiaoya stared fixedly at me, her eyes tracing the wall and the traces of dried blood. "They say I'm crazy," she whispered. "The doctor says they're just auditory hallucinations. My brother says it's just stress, but I know it's real. It's right there, inside the wall. Someone is scratching." Xiao Ji cut in from the side, his voice trembling. "Xiaoya, the room next door is empty. No one lives there," she suddenly screamed. "There is someone, and they're counting. 1, 2, 3, counting to see when I fall asleep. Even in my dreams, he keeps scratching. He never stops." My system flared to life. Potent dream element, acute stress, sensory overload detected. Analyzing sound source, interior of the target's bedroom wall. Frequency matches fingernails scratching concrete. Metaphysical signs, condensed resentment. A living soul is being trapped by a malignant presence. I turned sharply toward Xiao Ji. "Captain Xiao." I cut off Xiaoya screaming. Xiao Ji looked at me, perplexed. "What is it?" "Your sister isn't crazy," I said quickly, pointing at Xiaoya's bloody fingertips. "The sounds she hears are real." A cold gust of wind swept through the garden. Xiao Ji shivered. "Are you saying there's actually someone in the next room?" "Not in the next room," I replied, standing up and pointing at the wall connecting the two spaces. "There is a hidden space inside that wall. Something is in there, or someone." Xiao Ji's face turned white as paper as 1,000 horrific possibilities flooded his mind. "I need it done now. Right now. Immediately." Xiao Ji roared the final command into his phone, his chest heaving with every breath. He gripped the device so hard the screen cracked, his knuckles turning white from the strain. Xiaoya stopped crying and lifted her swollen eyelids to look at her brother. I sat back down on the bench, unscrewed my thermos, and took a slow sip of water. I tightened the cap back on. 10 minutes was more than enough time to tear down a wall. The air grew heavy as the system pulsed in my mind. Xiao Ji couldn't sit still. He paced back and forth across the gravel path like a caged animal. The soles of his leather shoes made a sharp, rhythmic crunching sound against the stones. I glanced down at the phone by my feet. The screen read 10:45 p.m. One fortune left to tell, and only 15 minutes remaining on the clock. From a side path, the steady click of approaching footsteps echoed through the garden. A man in a white lab coat approached us, wearing rimless glasses and a stethoscope around his neck. His ID badge identified him as the head psychiatrist of the facility. He scanned the anxious Xiao Ji and the trembling Xiaoya before finally locking eyes with me. He looked at my sign that read Dream Interpretation and adjusted his glasses with a smirk. "I'm Li Benji, head physician of Ward 6, he said, ignoring Xiao Ji's suspicious glare. "I don't believe in superstitions, master, but I've just finished my rounds and I'm curious. Lately, I've been having a very strange dream that's left me quite unsettled." I turned to face him as he leaned back, crossing his long, slender fingers over his knees. His nails were trimmed short and the edges were filed to a perfect, clinical finish. Li Benji spoke in a calm, rhythmic voice about his daily work in the operating room. But in the dream, every time he tried to make an incision, the scalpel blade turned soft. No matter how much force he applied, the moment the steel touched skin, it buckled. Every single blade in the city seemed to suffer the same fate. The patient lying on the table just stared back at him, perfectly still. There was no blood, no matter how hard he tried to cut. Not a single drop emerged. Lee Benji looked at me, the garden lights reflecting off his rimless glasses. My own analysis is that this is likely functional anxiety caused by work stress, he said. Master, what do you think? I didn't answer him immediately. In my vision, Lee Benji's white coat was spotless, but his hands told a different story. Thin threads of blood-red energy were coiling tightly around his fingers. They were digging deep into his flesh, revealing the truth of his bone dream. The softening scalpel wasn't stress, it was a rejection of the tool itself. A metaphysical symptom of a killer's instinct concentrating in his very fingertips. I stared at those long, slender hands and realized he wasn't a healer at all. It's not that you're stressed, I said, my voice cold. It's that the scalpel is getting in your way. Lee Benji's smirk froze instantly. The blade is a barrier between you and the flesh, and you're tired of touching life through metal. You want to use your bare hands to feel the warmth, feel the heartbeat, and then crush it. Lee Benji's crossed fingers suddenly uncurled behind his back. His right index finger began to drum a rhythmic beat against his leg. He stood up slowly, smoothing out the wrinkles in his white coat. What a joke, he said, his voice regaining its clinical edge. Fortune-telling is nothing more than pure invention, just as I thought. I am a doctor, I only know how to save lives. Whether it's an invention or not, you know the truth better than anyone. I picked up my small stool and looked him straight in the eye. Your hands are too steady for a healer. They look like the hands of an executioner. I suggest you take a very long vacation or turn yourself in. Lee Benji's eye twitched, a single crack in his perfect mask. He gave me one last, deep look before turning and walking away. He moved much faster than when he arrived, disappearing into the night. I watched his back as the system interface flickered before my eyes. Fortune-telling count, 3 of 3. Mission accomplished. Calculating reward. Congratulations, host. Brain cancer cell activity has decreased by 5%. Life expectancy has been extended by 30 days. You have received a cash reward of 1 million. My phone vibrated in my hand, and I answered, putting it on speaker. From the other end, I heard the screeching sound of a drill finally stopping. It's only half a meter wide. And the guy? Saw G's voice crackled through the phone. We caught him. He's a wanted fugitive. That bastard lived in there for almost half a year. The wall is full of holes. One of them is right at the head of the bed. The noise in the wall, it was him every single night. I could hear the sound of a metal cover being adjusted on the other end. Xiao Xiao covered her mouth, her entire body shaking like a leaf in the wind. Thank you. A sharp, heartbreaking scream finally tore from her throat. She wasn't crazy. It was all real. All those nights being treated like a mental patient finally found an outlet. Saw G hung up the phone. The cell phone slipped from her hand and fell into the grass, but she didn't pick it up. She just turned and hugged her sister, who wouldn't stop sobbing. I watched them, my hand tightening around my small stool. I stood up and lifted my gear. I stuffed the crumpled paper with the dream interpretation into my pocket. It was 11 p.m., shift over. I hadn't taken 2 steps when I heard Saw G's voice behind me. Wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. That doctor, Saw G said, catching up to me in a few strides. That Lee Benji, he's hiding something too, isn't he? I nodded toward the direction the doctor had fled. Check the records of everyone who died on his operating table. See if the causes of death in the official logs actually match up. I told him to look into missing person cases near the hospital too. The veins on Saw G's neck bulged with tension. Thanks, I said, waving a hand as I slung my canvas bag over my shoulder. I walked toward the midday sun, leaving the psychiatric hospital through the main gate. Chapter 20. I just want to eat. The rain that had been falling for 3 days finally stopped. When I woke up, it was already getting dark. I fumbled for my phone in the shadows and lit up the screen. I had missed calls and WeChat messages, all from Saw G. He confirmed Lee Benji was in custody, and they'd found a massive collection of human specimens in his basement. I tossed the phone back onto the pillow and touched the back of my neck. That crushing pressure I'd felt for months had finally eased up. My body was still thin, and my muscles felt weak. But that feeling of being on the verge of suffocating was gone. Instead, an intense hunger surged from my stomach. It wasn't chemo nausea, it was a raw, instinctive craving for food. I got out of bed and looked at the black jacket hanging on the rack. The whole internet was looking for that jacket, so I didn't touch it. I picked up a piece and shoved it into my mouth. Crunchy, tender, spicy, and burning hot. The oil slid down my throat, and a thin layer of sweat broke out on my forehead. This was what it felt like to be alive again, while people at the next tables chatted away. Hey, did you hear? They caught a pervert at the psychiatric hospital because of that fortune teller. Does that guy live at the police station or what? Why is he involved in everything? The internet was already calling me John the Seer, and someone had offered a massive reward for my address. I listened to the gossip about myself while dropping duck intestines into the hot pot. If they knew the legendary seer was sitting right next to them with a greasy mouth, they'd choke on their soup. Grandma, I want that. I want the long one. A bossy child's voice shouted from the next table. My hand froze midair just as I was about to dip the food into the pot. That voice sounded way too familiar. I turned my head slightly, peering through the opening of my hoodie. I saw an old woman and a child sitting at the table beside me. The woman wore a sober-colored qipao, her gray hair styled neatly as she wiped the boy's mouth. Surrounding them were 4 burly men sitting with only plain broth and vegetables. Their eyes never stopped scanning the room. They were bodyguards. It was the matriarch of the Sun family and that spoiled brat, Sun Xiaobao. I immediately lowered my head, practically burying my face in my bowl. That's too spicy, you can't eat it, Grandma Sun urged, trying to give him shrimp paste instead. No, I want what that man is eating. Xiaobao jumped up and pointed his finger directly at me. I was wearing a hat and had my mask pulled down to my chin. I held a piece of duck intestine with my chopsticks, frozen between dropping it or eating it. Xiaobao ran over and leaned against my table, staring at the boiling red oil before looking me right in the eye. It's you, Sun Xiaobao shouted. You're the man who patted my head. I thought, is this what they call the talent of a top-tier scout? His memory was incredibly sharp. Xiaobao, don't run off like that, Grandma Sun called out. The matriarch approached, leaning heavily on her cane. She took one look at me, her eyes locking onto mine. The old woman's wrinkled face suddenly lit up with a knowing smile. Now I understand, she whispered. Without an invitation, Grandma Sun sat down directly across from me. With a sharp gesture, she signaled her bodyguards to back off. Young man, she began. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to find you these past few days? I let out a long, heavy sigh. I shoved the duck intestine into my mouth, chewed it slowly, and swallowed. Since they'd already made me, there was no point in pretending anymore. I adjusted my mask to cover my face and said, Ma'am, I just came here to eat. My voice was raspy as I added, I'm not on the clock right now. Even with my hat on, someone pulled out their phone and pointed it right at me. That shout of the master echoed through the entire restaurant, killing the noise instantly. The hot pot joint went silent for a heartbeat before exploding into a total frenzy. Dozens of eyes locked onto me as someone came running over, bowl still in hand. Master, it really is the master. Please, give me an autograph. Master, give me the winning lottery numbers. Camera flashes started popping everywhere. The sound of shutters was constant, like a hail of gunfire. Immediately, the 4 bodyguards formed a defensive circle around me and the Sun family. With us trapped in the center, the meat on my plate suddenly lost all its appeal. Grandma Sun slammed her cane against the floor and barked, Make way, get back. We're just trying to eat. If I see anyone taking photos, I'll smash their phone. The crowd backed off, terrified, but they kept recording me from the outer edge. I set my chopsticks down and sighed. Ma'am, looks like our dinner is over. I grabbed a napkin and wiped my mouth. And thank you for your help the other day. Grandma Sun looked at me and said, You were right about my grandson. I've been sending him to the market with the butler, and the boy loves to haggle. He'll argue for half an hour over 2 yuan worth of green onions. Beside her, Xiaobao puffed out his chest and said, The vendor was trying to scam me. The leaves on those onions were already turning yellow. I stood up and checked the clock on the wall as someone yelled, Master, I'll pay 200,000 for a reading. I pointed at the clock. 8 p.m. Sorry, I already said I don't do readings outside of my working hours. I pointed to my pale face. Besides, I'm sick. I need rest. I pulled up my hood and nodded to Grandma Sun. With your permission, I'll borrow your bodyguards for a moment. Grandma Sun waved her hand. Escort the master. The 4 bodyguards forced a path through the crowd. I hurried out of the restaurant with my head down. The glass door shut, leaving the chaos behind. I stopped on the sidewalk as a gust of cold wind hit me. It hit hard. I hunched my shoulders against the chill. This fame was more nauseating than chemotherapy. Just as I went to hail a taxi, that cold, mechanical voice rang in my head. I froze. I'd barely finished eating, and I already had to get back to work. New mission assigned. I closed my eyes. It's like the system has cameras on me, always picking the moment I want to rest. Location, Starlight Media Building. The lower plaza of the influencer and streamer base. Time, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Method, observation and scoring. Field, appearance and luck chart. Objective, serve 3 clients and give them a rating and feedback. I opened my eyes. The building loomed in the darkness less than 500 meters away. A massive LED screen played a video of a popular streamer dancing. Below, countless small-time influencers gathered, live streaming on their phones as luxury cars zipped in and out. It was the shallowest, fakest place in the city. Observation and scoring? This was walking straight into the lion's den, a place full of people who live for their looks. People with 800 surgeries, and I have to judge their appearance? Does the system want me to make more enemies? Fine. I turned around and walked toward that gaudy, dazzling building. Let's see what this crowd really looks like once you strip away all those beauty filters. Chapter 21. Out of 10, you're only a 3. Ground floor of the Starlight Media Building. This city never sleeps. A massive LED screen covered the sky like a digital ceiling. It spanned the entire wall, looping over edited videos of the most popular streamers. The light pollution was unbearable. Neon lights stained the air a violent, bruised purple. The plaza was absolutely packed with people. Hundreds of tripods were lined up so close together they looked like a forest of steel. Behind every tripod stood a girl with flawless, heavy makeup or a man caked in foundation. Endless ring lights were switched on, blasting their faces until they were a ghostly, pale white. The noise merged into one massive, deafening wave of sound. My people, thanks to our top donor for that rocket. Follow me so you don't miss out. Tap that red heart. If we hit 10,000, I'll do a headstand and wash my hair live. I I sat in the shadows next to a large planter, watching the chaos unfold. Beside me, a blond guy was screaming into his phone, performing a desperate, improvised rap. He stopped, glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, and shuffled a few steps away. He shot me a look of pure disgust, as if I were trash. I didn't even blink. I pulled out a chipped, folding stool and sat down, letting my tired body rest. I took out a piece of cardboard and taped it to the step right in front of me. Observation and scoring. Only the truth is told. $10 per reading. Closing after 3 clients. I had scrawled the letters in thick, black ink. The letters were thick, black, and had a rough, rustic look to them. I unscrewed the cap of my thermos. I took a slow sip of water. It was 9:05. The night was young, but I was still alone. Everyone here was too busy performing for their cameras to notice anything else. No one spared a glance at my little divination stall tucked away in the corner. But that was fine with me. I had all the time in the world. I watched the pale, ghostly faces until a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Several bodyguards in sharp black suits emerged from the building. They shoved through the crowd to clear a path. Make way, move it. In the center of the chaos walked a woman in a tight, white dress. A pink fur coat hung off her shoulders, framing her long, perfectly styled black hair. Her skin practically glowed under the neon lights. This was Anangia. With 15 million followers across all platforms, she was the undisputed queen of streaming. The public worshipped her as the angel of purity. She had just finished her main broadcast, but was still holding her phone up for a live sign-off. Family, I'm so exhausted today. I'm just now leaving the building. That was Anangia's voice. The moment she faced the camera, her entire demeanor shifted. Her tone turned sweet and sugary, and she looked right at me. She swayed her body gently to the rhythm of her own words. Her movements were calculated, every inch of her performing for the lens. You want to see me take off my makeup? Oh, you're so naughty. I'm not even wearing any today. As she passed the garden, her gaze suddenly shifted toward my stall. She stopped dead in her tracks. Anangia stared at my humble cardboard sign and then at me, sitting there in the shadows. Lately, the divine internet diviner had become a viral sensation, even overshadowing her fame. She saw an opportunity and winked at the camera. Family, look what I found. A master. I heard the trendy fortune teller was around here. Could it be him? She adjusted her phone's angle to make sure I was framed in the shot. The live stream chat exploded instantly. No way. The black windbreaker and the little stool. It's him. It really is the divine seer. Anan, quick, go have him read your fortune. They wanted him to see what a true goddess looked like. Anangia watched the comments fly by as her viewer count skyrocketed. A smug smile played on her lips as she strutted toward me in 4-inch heels. The heavy scent of gardenia perfume hit me before she even reached the table. I looked up as she leaned in, deliberately showing off her low-cut neckline. Master, I've heard you're an expert at rating people, so why don't you give my face a score? She leaned in close, showing off skin so flawless you couldn't see a single pore. Her eyes were so large they took up half her face. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do I get? Anangia asked, radiating confidence. She was famous for having a divine face, the perfect mold for plastic surgeons. The surrounding influencers stopped their own streams and swarmed us, pointing their cameras my way. They were all waiting for my verdict. I looked her straight in the eye as the system interface flickered across my retinas. Red lines traced her facial contours as a torrent of data flooded my vision. Bone structure scan complete. Artificial jawline reconstruction detected. Bilateral asymmetry of 3 millimeters. Silicone prosthesis in the nasal bridge. Ear cartilage implants showing abnormal translucency. Inner and outer eye corners surgically altered. Multiple aging sutures and fillers detected. Forehead, temples, cheekbones, and chin all saturated with excessive hyaluronic acid. The filler was starting to shift. Her real bone age was 42 years old. The perfect face before me turned into a jigsaw puzzle of poorly fitted pieces ready to crumble. I didn't raise my voice, but my words cut through the noisy plaza with piercing clarity. 2 points. Anangia's smile froze, and the livestream chat went dead for a second before exploding into a frenzy. Are you blind? Anan only gets 2 points? This master is a total joke. Is he just doing this for clout? 2 points. My dog would score higher. Anangia's expression hardened, though she kept her voice sweet. Master, are you sure you saw correctly? Maybe the light out here is too dim. I tightened the cap on my thermos with a sharp click and repeated, 1 point then. I pointed directly at her chin. It's crooked. She instinctively reached up to touch her face. Your jawline. You've shaved the bone down 3 times. It can't support your skin anymore. You're relying entirely on protein threads. You have more surgical threads under your skin than fibers in your clothes. My voice remained flat, as cold as a coroner reading an autopsy report. I pointed to her temples, the area known as the marriage palace in divination. Too much filler is pressing against your nerves. You've been suffering from severe migraines lately, haven't you? I leaned in and locked eyes with her. And the most important part, you're 42 years old. Anangia's entire body recoiled as if I'd struck her. Liar, she screamed. Her sweet, high-pitched persona vanished instantly. Her voice cracked, turning into the raspy, deep growl of a man. I'm 18. I'm 100% natural. She swung her phone camera back toward herself, desperate for validation. Family, tell him, this guy is a total fraud. Do I look like a 42-year-old to you? That was her best-kept secret. Not even her own agency knew, yet I had exposed it all. The influencers around us stood frozen, their mouths hanging open in total silence. The legends about this fortune teller were actually true. Anangia saw the judgmental stares and the flood of insults pouring into her live chat. Old hag, scammer, give me my money back. Her mind finally snapped. She let out a deafening scream, covered her face, and bolted. Her heels clattered chaotically until one shoe flew off mid-stride. She didn't even stop to pick it up, limping toward her luxury van with one bare foot. A system notification chimed in my head, effective fortune reading 1 to 3 complete. I sat back down on my small stool as the brief silence in the plaza shattered. The gaze of the crowd shifted from mockery to something much more dangerous. It was the look of sharks that had finally caught the scent of blood. If I were a fraud, they would laugh, but if I were real, I was a god. Master, look at me, read my fortune. Rate me, I'll pay whatever you want. Check my star chart, master. Am I going to be famous? The crowd surged forward like a tidal wave, shoving cameras into my face. I frowned as a nauseating stench filled the air. It was the overwhelming aroma of pure greed. Hundreds of influencers were already shoving each other. They were all fighting for a spot at the very front. Stop pushing. Move those fake boobs out of the way. I pulled up my hood and adjusted my mask as the crowd swarmed me. My vision was filled with staggering legs and distorted, greedy faces. My small folding stool let out a groan, as if it couldn't take the pressure anymore. Get in line, I said, my voice rasping with pure impatience. If you don't line up, you don't count. If you aren't sincere, you don't count. And if you have too much plastic surgery, you definitely don't count. I pointed at a streamer with a botched nose job standing right in front of me. You move aside. You're blocking my light, and your nose is literally translucent. The streamer covered his face and retreated in total humiliation. My rules were strange, but in this chaos, they gave me an air of absolute authority. The crowd gritted their teeth and formed a crooked, messy line. Suddenly, a massive shadow shoved its way through the middle of the queue. Make way, the boss is here. Move it. A man of enormous proportions forced his way to the front. He wasn't tall, but he easily weighed over 270 pounds. His t-shirt was stretched to the breaking point, his stomach hanging over his belt like a giant leather ball. It was Akiang the Glutton, a famous streamer known for his massive mukbangs. Akiang held a half-finished bottle of liquor while screaming into his phone camera. Listen up, fam. Today we aren't eating. We're getting our fortunes read. The crowd parted for him. He marched right up to me and slammed his weight onto the ground, making the pavement tremble. A wave of stale alcohol and sour stench hit me square in the face, making me recoil. Akiang let out a massive belch, revealing teeth stained yellow from years of tobacco. Master, take a look at this face. Don't I have the look of a rich man? I'm famous. My follower count has been exploding lately. Yesterday, in a single stream, I cleared 50,000 in donations alone. He slapped his massive belly with a loud thud. They say fortune is stored in the gut, right? As I stared at him, my system interface flickered to life once again. There were no signs of plastic surgery, only a mass of death aura as black as ink. The aura was coiled around his stomach, a rotting dark red color spreading to his nearby organs. The wealth palace on his face glowed with prosperity, but his lifeline was a different story. The vein across the bridge of his nose was completely severed. This is money earned in exchange for your life, I muttered. Blood money. Akiang didn't hear me clearly. What? Money for a house? Yeah, I'm buying one in cash. I didn't give him a rating. Instead, I asked, what did you just have for dinner? 5 kilos of spicy crawfish, 2 kilos of pork belly, and a bottle of 52 proof liquor. The crowd around him let out a collective gasp of shock. Just hearing the sheer amount of food he'd consumed was terrifying. I looked him in the eye with a mocking smile. Akiang's grin froze as I spoke my verdict. Your score is a negative number. Niga, negative? Master, you're a riot. How can a score be negative? I looked at him coldly and replied, because you're about to die. Those 5 words silenced the entire street instantly. Even the influencers in the distance turned their cameras toward us. Akiang stood stunned for a few seconds before smashing his bottle on the ground. Glass shattered everywhere, and the stench of liquor filled the air. Are you putting a curse on me? He roared. He stood up, his thug-like face trembling and his eyes bulging. My health is perfect. I had a checkup last week, and it was just fatty liver. Everyone has fatty liver. You dare tell me I'm going to die? He shook his fist as if he wanted to strike me. I didn't move an inch. I simply pointed a finger at the corner of his mouth. The corners of your lips are black, a sign that your stomach energy is depleted. Your lower esophagus is severely burned, with over 80% erosion. The walls are as thin as a cicada's wing because you've forced them to expand. I'll show you how I finish this in one gulp, just to prove how tough my stomach really is. He reached down to grab the jagged half of the bottle that hadn't completely shattered. I watched his desperate attempt to look strong and let out a heavy sigh. Don't drink another drop. If you call 911 right now and get a stomach pump, you might live 2 more years. My voice sounded like a final verdict, cold and absolute. One more sip, and tonight will be your last supper. Akiang picked up the broken bottom of the bottle, which still held a single shot of liquor. With a defiant smirk, he threw his head back and poured the burning liquid down his throat. The moment the alcohol hit his esophagus, Akiang froze mid-motion. The glass slipped from his hand, and a strange, wet gurgle erupted from his throat. His face turned from a sickly yellow to a pale white, then shifted into a terrifying shade of blue. His eyes, once full of arrogance, were now wide with an indescribable agony. He clutched his stomach as his knees buckled, and he slammed heavily onto the pavement. A geyser of dark, reddish-black liquid sprayed out of his mouth, splashing everywhere. It wasn't wine, it was blood mixed with undigested food and shredded bits of his stomach lining. He reached out a blood-stained hand to grab my pants, but he only clawed at the empty air. He coughed up another mouthful of gore, his body collapsing like a massive mountain of rotting meat. He convulsed a few times before going completely still, right there in the middle of the street. The surrounding influencers screamed in terror as the crowd scattered, leaving a wide, empty circle around us. I stayed seated and watched him. I didn't help because I knew it was useless. This was the karma he had built for himself. The crowd fell into a deathly silence. No one dared to think this was just a show for followers anymore. They all stared at me with a suffocating mix of respect and pure terror. This wasn't just predicting the future. This was the judge of hell himself passing sentence. I didn't forget my goal. I pulled out my phone and checked the screen. The system pinged. Valid divinations, 2 out of 3. 1 minute remaining. The crowd had backed away more than 10 meters, and no one dared to step closer. I frowned, realizing the mission still wasn't complete. I stood up, ready to ask if anyone else wanted a consultation. Right then, a black Rolls-Royce pulled slowly to the curb with a license plate reading 8888. The door opened, and a middle-aged man in a high-end tailored suit stepped out. He was flanked by 4 bodyguards as the air around us seemed to turn ice cold. The temperature dropped several degrees the moment his feet hit the pavement. Akiang's pool of blood hadn't even dried yet, giving off a sweet, metallic stench. The man didn't look at the blood on the ground or the influencers surrounding him. The influencers held their phones tight but were too paralyzed with fear to move. He walked straight toward me, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the asphalt. This was Li Chung, the billionaire shark of Starlight Media and the owner of this entire district. He had watched everything from his top-floor window, from Ainan's collapse to Akiang's death. He was a cunning businessman who didn't believe in ghosts or gods. He only believed in profit. But he was in deep trouble. His company's IPO was a disaster. Everything was stagnant. His streaming platforms had been hit by one scandal after another. His cash flow was drying up, and he needed a real answer, even if it came from the occult. Li Chung stood before my stall, looking down at me with the cold authority of a man born to rule. He signaled his bodyguard, who handed him a check that he placed onto my dusty little table. 10 million, Li Chung said. Master, I'm inviting you upstairs for a cup of tea. Check my company's feng shui, and while you're at it, take a look at my luck for the coming years. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. 10 million just for a cup of tea and a reading was more than most people earn in several lifetimes. The influencers, who had been begging for small donations moments ago, turned red with envy. Is this how a true master gets treated? No one in their right mind would turn down that kind of money or snub a man like Li Chung. But I kept my head down, watching the seconds on my phone screen tick away. Li Chung frowned, thinking the price wasn't high enough, and slapped down a second check. 20 million. Be my advisor, and you can name your own annual salary. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was a ticket to the highest level of society. I finally lifted my head and looked Li Chung in the eye. A fortune reading takes at least a minute, and I was out of time. The system's mission window closed at exactly 11 p.m. Once that clock struck, I'd lose my powers and become just another fraud. I reached out, took the 2 checks, and tucked my phone into my pocket. A smug smile touched Li Cheng's lips, thinking everyone has a price. Then, I handed the checks right back to him. His smile froze as I began folding the 4 corners of my blue cloth. I packed my cardboard sign into my canvas bag and stood up. Mr. Li, your tea is a bit too expensive for my taste, I said. I pointed to the digital clock on the building nearby as the numbers flipped to 2300 hours. It's my clock out time, I told him, slinging the bag over my shoulder. I grabbed my folding stool and added, even if the king himself showed up, he'd have to wait. The crowd went silent, stunned that I'd turned down 20 million just to go home. Li Cheng's face darkened with a rage he hadn't felt in years. Is it not enough? He hissed, signaling his bodyguards to block my path. I can double it as overtime pay, kid. Don't throw away your future. I looked at him, my expression as calm as still water. I don't care about money, Mr. Li. I only care about staying alive. I shoved past his bodyguard and left him standing there in the dust. That bodyguard was a mountain of a man, nearly 6'3". But with one light shove, I sent him stumbling back before he even realized what happened. I cut through the crowd without looking back, my thin silhouette as sharp as a blade. Li Chung stood frozen, his fingers tightening around the 2 checks I'd shoved back at him. The wind howled, making the paper rustle in his hand. He didn't order anyone to chase me. My final words had struck a nerve, tapping into his deepest, most primal fear. The foundation of his royal business empire was cracked, and I was the only one who knew. Boss? The bodyguard whispered, looking for orders. Fall back, Li Chung replied, his eyes tracking my disappearing figure with a complex gaze. Find out where he lives. I want to see him first thing tomorrow morning. Late into the night, I made sure to lose any potential tails. I took 3 different detours before finally heading back to my apartment. I tossed my canvas bag on the floor and collapsed onto the sofa, completely drained. The system had strengthened my body, but this level of mental exhaustion was crushing. Daily mission period ended. Current progress, 2 out of 3. Mission status, incomplete. Progress saved. Host may continue tomorrow at the same time to complete the final reading. I let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. The mission didn't have to be finished in one night, as long as it was within the window. The feeling washed over me again. I had money, and for now, my life was safe. But I was still living like a ghost, so I forced myself to get up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights shimmering in the dark. I reached up and touched the back of my neck. The tumor was a sleeping beast. It was quiet now, but it could wake up at any moment. I stared at my reflection in the glass and thought, it's time to spend big and live a little. I decided to take another nap before the morning sun hit the Yundin Jiao residential complex. Li Chung hadn't gone home. He was standing by the stone lion at the main entrance. The cigar in his hand had burned down to the nub, dropping ash onto his custom leather shoes. Behind him sat a fleet of 20 black cars parked in a grim, silent line. They were positioned bumper to bumper, completely blocking all 3 exits of the complex. 2 men in black suits and sunglasses stood by every vehicle with their arms crossed. They looked like a wall of granite. Inside the security booth, the property manager gripped his walkie-talkie with trembling hands. His forehead was soaked in sweat, but he didn't dare call the police on Li Chung. The boss of Starlight Media was a known heavy hitter, and the neighborhood group chat was already exploding. Residents tried to leave for work, but they couldn't get past the perimeter. The men in suits convinced them to turn back, claiming they were protecting their master's safety. The head bodyguard approached Li Chung and whispered, "We found him. Jiang Feng lives in Building 5. Apartment 502. He hasn't left since last night. No food deliveries, no packages, nothing." Li Chung tossed his cigar aside and crushed the butt under the sole of his shoe. "I don't believe he won't come out," he muttered. "He has to show his face eventually." He checked his watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. The sun was starting to burn, so Li Chung cracked open a cold bottle of water. He was waiting for me, the kid who turned down his 20 million yuan check last night. He thought I was just playing hard to get, a trick he'd seen 1,000 times before. He assumed I wanted a higher price or the prestige of being chased by a man like him. Inside Building 5, I rolled over in my bed, the blackout curtains keeping the room dark as night. The pressure in my skull was worse this morning, like someone had filled my head with lead. I reached for my painkillers and swallowed 2 of them dry. My phone vibrated under the pillow. Not a call, just my morning alarm. I knew exactly what was happening downstairs. I'd seen the cars following me last night. But I didn't care. I was a terminal cancer patient who could die at any moment. Nothing else mattered. Why would I even bother going down there? To hear him sentence me? I pulled the covers over my head and went back to sleep. Outside, Li Cheng's staff set up a folding chair and an umbrella as the sun climbed higher. By 2 p.m., the asphalt was baking and Li Cheng's shirt was plastered to his back with sweat. That calm, in control attitude was slowly starting to crumble. Anxiety took over as he checked his watch for the 100th time. 6 hours had passed, my curtains hadn't moved, and a crowd was starting to take photos. When the news broke, streamers arrived and started broadcasting live from across the street. The hashtags #StarlyBoss begging at the door and #How arrogant is fortune teller John started trending. A wall of luxury cars just to see me. The search rankings began to skyrocket. Li Cheng's face grew darker by the second as he realized the situation had flipped. He wanted to pressure me, but now he was the one being watched by the entire city. It was a ridiculous comedy, and he was the clown on stage, begging for attention. "Go knock on the door," Li Chung hissed through gritted teeth. His head of security hesitated, noting the complex's strict rules against forced entry. I said go knock. Li Chung roared, his patience finally snapping. But just as the guards prepared to force their way in, a sharp siren tore through the air. A white ambulance with flashing blue lights swerved into the entrance against traffic. The driver of the black car blocking the path didn't even have time to react. The ambulance didn't slow down. It slammed right into the luxury car's bumper. "Clear the way. This is an emergency," the driver's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Li Chung stood up as his fleet was forced to scatter out of the way. The ambulance stopped in front of Building 5, and 5 minutes later, they wheeled out a stretcher. I was lying there, swapped out of my windbreaker and into a gray tracksuit. An oxygen mask covered my face, my eyes were shut tight, and my skin was paper white. Between the fasting and the rising brain pressure, I didn't even have to pretend to be dying. Li Chung rushed over and grabbed the stretcher, shouting, "Stop playing dumb. How much more money do you want?" I didn't open my eyes, and the doctor by my side stepped forward to block the bloated man. He was a man in his late 40s wearing gold-rimmed glasses. His badge identified him as the emergency center director, the man I hired from a private hospital for a fortune. "What do you think you're doing?" the doctor snapped, as Li Chung pointed at me on the stretcher. "He's faking it. He's pretending to be sick," Li Chung yelled, but the doctor just let out a cold laugh. He pulled a CT scan from his pocket and slammed it against Li Cheng's chest. "Glioblastoma, stage 4. Intracranial hypertension. His brain could collapse at any moment. Go ahead, dare to touch him. If he dies here, you'll be charged with intentional homicide," the doctor warned, leaving Li Chung frozen. Li Cheng grabbed the x-ray, and though he couldn't read the images, the diagnosis was clear: undifferentiated glioma. Terminal stage. Palliative care recommended. Li Cheng stared at me. My face was so gaunt I was unrecognizable. My breathing was weak, the movement of my chest almost imperceptible. I wasn't some grand master, just a dying man. Every livestream camera was pointed at this scene, and the online comments section exploded. I have to ask him something. Li Cheng's voice trailed off, but the doctor cut him down. Ask him later. Right now we have to save him. Move. The doctor and nurses shoved the stretcher past him. As they rushed toward the ambulance, the stretcher wheels hit the curb with a hard jolt. The sudden shock made me wince and furrow my brow. I let out a low groan of pain as Li Cheng stood motionless, watching the ambulance doors slam shut. The siren wailed again as the ambulance tore through the crowd and sped away into the distance. Li Cheng gripped my CT scan so hard his knuckles turned bone white. Li Cheng said he could buy anyone with money, but he couldn't buy a dying man. Inside the ambulance, the doctor who looked so serious a moment ago sighed in relief. He took off his glasses and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Boss, how was my performance back there?" he asked me. I opened my eyes. I pulled off the oxygen mask and sat up on the stretcher. "Not bad," I said. "Give yourself a $2,000 bonus." "Thank you, boss." The doctor grinned from ear to ear. "Where to now? Back to the hospital?" I glanced at the cityscape blurring past the window. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, and the sun was still beating down hard. "We're not going to the hospital," I said, rubbing my wrist. The needle Lu Zishan had inserted was still there, so I ripped it out. I pressed down on the puncture site and said, "Take me to the car dealership." The doctor looked stunned. "To buy a car? This stretcher is too hard," I muttered, stretching my neck until my vertebrae popped. "I still have to work tonight, so I need a car where I can make money while lying down." Chapter 25, Buying a Car in Cash. Only the most expensive will do. The auto park on the south side of the city gathered all the major luxury brands. The Mercedes-Benz star emblem rotated as the Porsche windows reflected the harsh light. As I walked in, a few salesmen glanced my way and immediately looked away. Not a single person approached me. In this business, every salesperson develops the eyes of a hawk. My entire outfit probably didn't even cost $2. With my pale face looking like I'd just survived a terminal illness, I didn't look the part. I looked like a beggar looking for free AC or a grease monkey from the shop next door. I didn't care what they thought. That little performance earlier had drained every ounce of my energy. I walked straight to the center of the showroom toward a massive black van. It was a Lexus LM, known as the Queen of Markups. This van isn't about value. It's about pure status and comfort. I slid the door open to find a 4-seat layout with 2 massive captain's chairs in the back. The leather was fine and the seat was incredibly soft as I pressed the button on the armrest. The seat reclined slowly, the footrest rose, and the massage function kicked in. I let out a long sigh as the ache in my back finally began to fade. Suddenly, a man with slicked back hair and a sales manager badge marched over. He had his brow furrowed, looking at me with pure disgust. "Sir, this is a display vehicle. You can't just climb in whenever you feel like it." He pointed at the door and snapped. "If you get it dirty, you can't afford to fix it. Get out." I didn't move, keeping my eyes closed as the rollers massaged my spine, and simply said, "Bring me some water." "There's a shop outside to the right. We don't give out free water here." Security. In the distance, 2 guards heard the shout and started marching toward us. Just then, a girl who looked like a fresh graduate approached with a paper cup in her hand. She looked incredibly shy, her uniform a bit too large for her small frame. "Sir, here is some water," she said, offering me the cup of warm liquid. The manager glared at her and snapped, "Xiaolu, who told you to interfere? Letting people like this in just ruins the mood for our actual customers." The girl lowered her head, not daring to speak, but she kept her hand extended with the cup. I opened my eyes, took the cup from her, and took a slow sip. The warmth felt good as it slid down my throat, soothing the ache inside. "Do you have this model in stock?" I asked. The girl froze for a second. Yes, we have one. But there's a markup and a waiting list." I pointed at the seat I was currently occupying. "I want this one. I don't care if people have sat in it, as long as I can take it right now." Beside us, the manager let out a mocking laugh. "Hey buddy, do you even know what this costs? With everything included, it's nearly 2 million. That fever must be making you hallucinate." I set the cup down and reached into my pocket while the manager and guards crossed their arms. They watched me, waiting to see what kind of joke I'd pull next. I pulled out a black card with no complex designs, just a series of gold numbers. I dropped it onto the armrest with a dull thud and looked at the manager like he was a fly.